Welcome to the inauspiciously numbered Owen and Prince Chat D&D number 13. And for such an inauspicious occasion, we have an inauspicious topic we'll get started on in a minute or two, I guess. But we're talking about, the nebulous title is The State of the OSR. We're talking about the crop oilseed rape, of course, today. The popular replacement for sunflower oil in the wake of the
That's right,
Ukraine war.
Owen. Very nice to be here.
Yep.
Inauspicious broadcast, inauspicious guest, inauspicious topic. So let's
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
right into it, I guess.
Yeah. It's we talked literally for a couple of minutes before the show. We're agreeing exactly how offensive you could be for the show today. A
This
topic
will
of great
be
rage.
this will be the least offensive show you've ever done.
Yeah.
I'll be positive and I'll
Mm.
avoid any use of
Again, Robertson.
slurs, or at least restrict them to the absolute minimum possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
From the approved list.
Let's get
Yeah.
into the state of the OSR.
Um,
Um, is it a good
yeah.
idea to do we need an introduction of like what it's
Yeah. No.
maybe
Let's.
it
Yeah.
helps if I
Yeah.
maybe it helps if you start by sort of I guess explaining like I guess your view on the OSR,
Mm,
how it
yeah.
once was
Yeah.
and what
In
it
the
is
Elysian
now.
fields. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, why
well,
not?
let's say what it was. What we mean in gaming terms, the OSR is OS is for old school. Um, and OSR, old school Renaissance, old school revival, something like that. And it's this catch-all term, really used very profligately to describe basically all old school
Or revolution.
revive.
Yes.
Old school revolution. Old school, but and the reason revival is helpful, by the way, I should say, we'll stick to revival to start with, right? Just because for a lot of people it meant was we have these old games from the 80s, 70s, early 90s, maybe that we really love, and they've kind of gone out of fashion. You can't get them anymore. The companies aren't producing that kind of game anymore, and it mostly applies to D&D, but it does apply to other games as well. And so the idea was okay, via either creating new games or encouraging play in the old style, or by reviving old games under the open game license. That's kind of, in a sense, where the whole thing starts. Um, that's this old school revival, old school renaissance, all these different things. So that means new games, old play styles, old games republished under the OGL. All of that creates this big ecosystem of blogs and fora. That's originally how it starts, and in latter days you do have more multimedia. You've got more video and podcasts and stuff. I mean, they're always podcasts, and lots of publications, lots of adventures, lots of games. And I think for many years that's a phrase which kind of is common, and people isn't super contested. People contest the exact parameters. In more recent years, say that certainly the last 3 or 4 years, you can see as a catch-all phrase, it's kind of collapsed. Now there's all kinds of grouplets coming out of this. We like some of the stuff about old games more than we like all the stuff about new games. Kind of meta movement. That's what I'd say the OSR was.
Um, I would, I guess, agree with part. To me,
Hmm.
the how it started, the OGL is a good way to is a
Hmm.
good thing to point at as sort of like something that facilitated it. But at its core, it's basically people playing a third edition of Dungeons and Dragons and kind of
Hmm.
realizing that somewhere um, along the lines, of all this mechanical innovation, something had been lost. This was
Yeah.
people in the D20 era and people from the
Yep.
era of like the fourth edition, especially,
Yeah.
and that kind of like um, reignited an interest in older
Mm.
games.
Yeah.
And something that you said kind of triggered me because you
Mm.
said that like that it was also about making new games. You're right, by the way, in pointing out that it wasn't just about playing old school D&D in the beginning. Obviously, old school D&D is going to be like center of mass because
Mm.
a lot of these people were going to
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
D&D players. But yeah, there was a bit of like Arduin, RuneQuest, Empire of the Petal
Mm.
Throne, Traveler,
Yep.
Camel World, all that shit. Fight On magazine is a really good
Yeah.
resource for like early OSR. Right. So, but new games wasn't originally a thing. In the beginning, it really was like a sort of like an old school revival. It was actually mildly controversial. Like the first games that were being made, these were retro clones. These
Yeah.
were cleaned up versions of the OGL. Sorry, cleaned up versions of the old rule sets. Kept mostly faithful. Sometimes they had minor adjustments because people were unsure if they were going to get sued.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was just a vehicle to make new content for old games. Um, and this kind of shifted at some point when people started publishing their own like sort of like hacked rule sets, and this kind of this started a I guess kind of an acceleration or a rocket jump to ever broader definitions of
Mm.
what the OSR is and what it was about, and also
Yeah.
you had successive migrations from uh, like again, the 5e fandom started getting in. I think
Mm.
at some point, like again, real and I story gaming is a term that it gets thrown around a lot in pedantia, right? In the
Mm-hmm.
pedantic marches, but these were real, as in real story gamers, as in the
Yeah.
GNS definition of people who like
Yeah.
story games, like whatever Dogs in the Vineyard and that sort of stuff, right? Like real
Yeah.
narrative
Powered by the
emulation
Apocalypse
games
games, we think of now
powered
as
by the
well. Yeah.
apocalypse. Yeah,
Yeah.
Faith Core, that shit. So yeah, again, all those people kind of like moved in, and this, in my view, has in the beginning there was a huge emphasis on creativity and fresh ideas, and it makes a lot of sense because the current edition of third edition of Dungeons and Dragons, which was third edition, had grown overly mechanistic, kind of like stale, especially played out near the end of it, where it felt like it was just like pure mechanics and it had no soul, right? There was
Yeah.
no creativity and fun. So the OSR was like a sort of countercultural movement. And but this continued on and on and on until basically all there's no longer really a common frame of reference anymore. That's the state that we're in
Mm.
right now with the OSR.
Yeah. I'd say Liam actually points out before you said there are no new games. Very early on, there do begin to be like not just retro clones. So Osric for Golden Glory, those are two very obvious ones. Sword and Wizardry, I don't know how early it is, but you do start to get weird combos. So Castles and Crusades is the obvious one there, which is like an old school version of third edition,
Yeah, stripped
sort of.
down
Yeah,
3E. Yeah,
yeah,
and you can also point to I think they weren't called Frog God games back then, but they were called Necromancer games.
yes, they were. Yeah,
If you look at like their adventures, these are wink wink nudge nudge made for third edition, wink wink, right? And I
yeah,
think they actually managed to get their hands on. Oh, I think they put out a version of Necropolis,
yeah. They
which
did.
is
Yeah,
for those not in the know,
Necromancer
that's
Games version. Yeah,
yeah, for Gary Gygax's last adventure that he only published for either third edition or some sort of horrible trad game adventure. Sorry, game that he produced at some point, which never.
Legendary
I think it
Adventure.
was stewed
Is
into
it LA?
oblivion.
Is it LA or
It's
is it DJ that he published? It's DJ he published it for, I
DJ
think.
Dangerous Journeys. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that Trent Smith has put out an AD&D reader for it, so you can convert it to
for
AD&D.
a part of it. Yeah,
Yeah, for part of it. Yeah,
yeah, and there's I think the Frog God Games put out an OD&D version or a Swords and Wizardry version at some point, but
yeah, yeah. We've got the crowd in for discussing Oilseed Rape Harvest.
well, I'm
Gus
sure
and
that
E are here for
it's
that.
about the OSR. You know,
We're
you gotta
here to talk
discuss
about the
that oil
OSR.
seed.
Yeah. A CNC is, if you know what you're reading between the two editions, as Prince says, Necromancer in general, as others were wink wink publishing for third or for CNC or whatever. But if
CNC
you knew
was
the
Troll Lord
editions,
Games, yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah, Troll, yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean, that's yeah,
it's a weird precursor. It never quite Um, I think it's theoretically it could have started there, but it somehow it never. I guess I've never really identified it with the
Yeah.
OSR. It always seemed to be sort of like it's separate thing. Maybe it was the
Mm,
aesthetics to it. The ethos
yeah.
seemed to be a little bit different. But you're right in pointing at it as
Mm.
a precursor for sure.
I think in terms of the historical moment which sees the rise of what we then call the OSR from sometime in the noughties till sometime in the last few years, the phrase that's often used from the mid noughties maybe onwards, late noughties onwards. I think it's definitely in that kind of gumbo mix of people are starting to experiment, third parties are starting to experiment, opened up by the OGL. So you've got, I would say, maybe this is something to say there are these three. Let me suggest you, Prince, there are three big well springs. I know this is not the modern state of the OSR to the audience, but I think it's good to kind of establish what we're talking about. One wellspring is the OGL. That means you can start doing some of your own stuff with this game. Remember the very good, completely bizarre, not for D&D adventure, Fall of Constantinople, that you
Oh,
like and I like, but it's not. It's
yeah, I've
weirdly
run
like
it.
is it? Yeah, indeed. A guy writes it for third edition D&D, but it's obviously not for third edition D&D.
Listen, he
Yeah,
writes it for, I don't know. This was made for like RuneQuest, and then he had an
yeah,
intern
yeah,
make third edition
yeah,
stats, something like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I can definitely see adapting just old stuff into CNC. Hey Lynch. So that's one wellspring, is just the possibility of the OGL. Another is, you mentioned GNS, other things. This is not very exciting or important. We're not going to go into it, but like the Forge and Ron Edwards and game theory, not game theory in the kind of mathematical decision point sense, but
Uh,
like the idea that there's all this, there's lots of nerds basically like us,
yeah,
but
no,
less
I don't
cool.
think they had anything to do with
Yeah, yeah.
the OSR. Let me
No,
cut
no,
that
but
off
yeah.
immediately.
No, no. I think the point is there is part of an increasingly vibrant and engaged internet culture around creating new spaces for games, and I think that is a contributor to the later OSR. Um,
Um, well,
as you mentioned, you said as story gamers coming in, via
yeah, no, but
GNS.
that's bad. That didn't contribute
Yeah, it's bad.
meaningfully. That contributed
It's
to its
yeah.
decline. That's like
The,
the lamos come in when it's already successful and their own stuff. Like it's sort of like withering on the vine. So they attach themselves to a
yeah,
movement that's burgeoning and they fuck it up.
yeah.
That's my.
Like little
I'm sure there's.
vampires. Yeah.
Listen, there's a guy who made. There was one. Like one game. What is it? Nightmares Beneath. I'm sure that
Hmm.
guy is a story gamer. Maybe that was a good. That was a good game. But
Yeah.
for the most part, this is true. Like this is
Yeah,
purely
sure, sure.
parasitic.
But
One way
we're
exchange
talking about
only.
historical origins. Yeah, maybe sure. But in
Yeah.
terms of the things that are going on, and the third, and this connects back to the OGL particularly, is the fact that there are people interested in who have many of whom have never stopped playing AD&D, including AD&D first. Some of whom have stopped for a time, but are interested again for various reasons. And the internet, wide access to the internet does open this up because you just you Google stuff and find out about stuff that you couldn't find out about 10 years before, basically. Um,
Well,
and those people want retro clones basically are connected to that group of people who are able to make their own games again. They test the legal waters, and they kind of press the limits of some of the logic around the OGL, things like that.
I think the reason the OSR was successful is that
Good
on the one
evening,
hand,
JP Morris, Fire Brain.
you did have you did have there was definitely a big component of people who you could find on the OD&D boards or Dragon's Foot
Mm,
or yeah, Knights and
yeah.
Knaves Alehouse. So people who had been playing the game for a very long time. So there was a lot of
Yep.
like institutional knowledge,
Hmm.
but also um, you needed people that were willing to. They were willing to sort of color outside of the lines a bit. That's
Yeah.
they were willing to experiment, and um, a lot of people that you mentioned, like especially if you look at people who play AD&D for a long time, they're not as likely to. They either already have a completely customized homebrew system, um, or they just play AD&D and they're fairly, which with minor customization, they're fairly happy. So this is
Hmm.
uh, it's like the lightning in a bottle, I guess.
Yeah.
The conditions were right for you had enough institutional knowledge still present. You had the OGL, and then you have like newer people going in, and then
Mm,
voila, this all came together. Uh,
mm,
Lightning in a bottle, voila, the OSR, and
yeah.
it kept growing, kept putting out really cool stuff. Very I think also the official corporate stuff had grown very decadent, right? So very
Mm,
thick, long texts.
mm,
Again, giant stat blocks, all that stuff. And
mm.
here, a lot of the fat was trimmed, and it felt more essential and more real.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think in just to kind of because we're heading towards talking about the sort of then what happened, but I think his useful anecdote. I'm gonna how I started reading OSR blogs, things like that, was I was running fourth edition. I hadn't been out of playing D&D for long, and it wasn't like I was out. I just I graduated from my undergrad university, moved to where I did my postgrad, and then a couple of years into that, some friends wanted to play D&D, so I was like, "Yeah, I'll run D&D," and I'd played fourth edition. As in, what I'd run was fourth edition, and part of what got me into D&D, I played like Baldur's Gate and Temple of Elemental Evil, which are second and third edition respectively, on video game, but was listening to the Penny Arcade actual play podcasts, which are still some of the more legitimate examples of their kind in some way, in their own small way. But I was like, yeah, this sounds fun. So they ran a Dark Sun campaign as an undergrad, and then started running a new campaign, and run it for years, for many years, and basically just started thinking more about D&D, tried to research resources to add to stuff, different adventures, and picked up more, because it's the internet. I was finding out that people had these different ideas, and people might not run fourth, but might have done something with a fourth edition module, for instance, that kind of thing. I was watching YouTube channels that dealt with some of that stuff, like that were at the intersection of popular and more niche. So people like Ben Milton or Matt Colville, and and there's stuff there. I was like, oh, this is interesting. There's so many ideas and so many things you can get into, and there's all this content out there, and there's all these ideas.
Oh, you got in
Yeah,
after the Cambrian
yeah,
explosion, is what you're basically saying. All right.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
when they're on
Hello,
YouTube.
Michael. We are. I think we are doing well. I think we are doing well. Prince, you doing well?
Pretty well. Yeah, I got married.
Yeah. For people who missed
Pretty
it, Prince
healthy.
got married last month,
That's
so
right.
that's very
That's
cool.
right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So the
And
reason I give the anecdote is that um, it's that I was coming into an ecosystem. There's so many things. There's so many
yeah,
things out there, and it took me a while to land at what I wanted and liked. But the point was that there was, and lots of it looked exciting. Some of it I don't think is exciting now, but like there's so many exciting looking things,
yes.
Um,
The
and
hype.
yeah,
Well,
and that
I
wasn't
think
what fourth and fifth had really. Fourth and fifth didn't feel like that.
no, correct. That felt the official stuff felt very stale. I got in,
Hmm.
I think, when I was working on my master's, so it would have been something like somewhere between 2008 and 2012, kind of like that. Probably more like 2012 when I got in properly. Um, and this was when the blogging era was basically in full
Mm,
swing. Actually, slightly
yeah.
past the full swing. I just caught the tail end of it. And yeah, like actual adventures coming out. Then it was still manageable. You had a few major blogs that kept it all together. You had the whole blogging cycle where people would discuss something and then other people would reblog it, right? Uh,
Hmm.
I remember that somewhere in what is it, 2021 or 22, that sometimes you get a little dying echo of that. Somebody posts something and then one or two other beacons they blog about that as well, and then that's how you generate content, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
right now, like blogs are pretty dead. My
yeah.
blog's doing fine, obviously, but the as an ecosystem, this is a
As an
sort of
ecosystem, yeah, yeah.
graveyard. Yeah.
I think it's
Um,
interesting. You see, by the way, just as an
yeah.
aside, I think it's interesting to see the rise of blogs though with Substack. The
Oh yeah.
idea that what you have a specialized platform which helps curate the social media experience. So it's this kind of weird combination of things from Twitter. Really, it's the post Twitter, hence why you're not allowed to post. You can't get image embeds on Twitter because Twitter hates Substack. But it also represents some of that kind of old blogosphere stuff where people were writing articles and putting them on their blogs.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
have seen like some return with Substack. It's that
yeah,
is helpful, and it's also
yeah,
necessary if we're gonna get into like
yeah.
where I feel the old OSR was going, and now where maybe like a part of it I think is at least developing positively. But back in ye olden days, this shit wouldn't be on YouTube. This
Hmm.
would be
Yeah,
blog
yeah.
posts. There would
Mm,
be reviews, and then it would be like, well, okay, oh wow, something new is coming out. Somebody made their
yeah, yeah.
own um, their
Mega
own
dungeon.
OD&D hack. Mega dungeons were being
Yeah,
rediscovered, right?
yeah, yeah,
As I was watching it, that this was on Grog Nardia. That's right.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
By the way,
and the
he says
first
underrated
Kickstarter.
flex.
Yeah,
I'm still winning at this dead format. Talking about you,
correct.
of course, he is the master of doing an underrated flex. If I'm still winning this dead format, as he's like, well, some of you stopped playing AD&D First Edition. I never did. He
Yeah,
says,
of course.
tapping his pipe.
Hell
Um,
yeah.
but yeah, so I think at the point you were doing that, I was just playing Fourth Edition, and that was what I did. And some trad games like Deadlands and Vampire and stuff like that.
I
Not so
I
much
caught a
Vampire, but
little bit of
yeah,
fourth edition, but I always
yeah,
found it to be um,
mm,
pretty miserable. And I was a 3E head for
yeah,
quite a while. I didn't mind it as much. I don't think I would like it now, but
no,
fourth really
yeah.
soured me on it.
Yeah, I think I very much accepted it as, though it's not necessarily a very good example of it, I accepted it just as what it is, which is this kind of, you have maps, you fight battles on them with figures, that, and in a sense that was fine. That was kind of initially what I was fine with. What I
So
realized
you,
as the players got confident and as they started wanting to do stuff, I realized the game didn't support you in doing that stuff. That was one of the things that pressed me to look
uh,
elsewhere, because you had
it's
to learn,
awful. Like,
yeah, yeah,
what if it literally, I don't know.
hmm,
It's let's say you
yeah,
have
yeah,
a favorite uncle that comes around every 2 weeks, and one day, like, your parents, they bring somebody, and it's a smelly autistic homeless man, right? And your parents are like, no, this
autobiographical
is
for
him.
Prince.
It's
Yeah,
the same guy, you
yeah,
know. It's just like your uncle that you know and love. Just trust us. Come on.
yeah.
But it's not.
Um, Yeah, it's the T1000. Yeah, um, come to destroy the past. But
If
yeah,
they would
and
have just
so
called it D&D Tactics, it probably would have
yeah,
gone
yeah,
over
it would
better. But it's all this fucking
yeah,
corporate like, oh well, I tried one of the older games, ha ha ha, and I was like, huh, hit points, well, oh, they die at zero, ha ha, and encumbrance, this is so clumsy, and just the
yeah,
contempt as well when they put this junk, this pig slop before you. Yeah, it makes total sense.
yeah. So yeah, no, I think so. That and I think anyway, the point is the summary of that and the reason for these anecdotes is to say that you have this early. We'll call it the OSL. Remember, we're using that as a catch-all term. We're not trying to be overly precise. But and then there's this kind of great, as you call it, the Cambrian explosion. Loads of stuff is coming out.
Yeah.
Maybe the blog era is dying down, but you've got Google Plus, you've got loads of new content, loads of new creators, and it's profiting off the creative bankruptcy of wizards,
Um.
basically. There's growth
Yeah,
in that direction.
I mean, at some point it gets complicated, right? Like, at some point the Ennies gets involved, right? So then you again, it also, like, basically this is an attempt at the
Mhm.
traditional um, RPG ecosystem, which is also
Yeah,
stale, corrupt, and creatively bankrupt, to sort of, again, to vampirically attach itself and assimilate
yeah,
this
yeah,
new blood into a way that all the money can be funneled into the existing sort of value streams, with predictable results for the people being assimilated.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for a while it was like a genuinely sort of authentic kind of grassroots movement, and
Mm,
this gradually it became like commercialized, and part of that commercialization is good and necessary, but there's always all these trade-offs and
mm,
effects where at some point it is certain elements work if you try to run it as a hobby, and
mm.
but those elements
They
are actually
work less
threatening
well.
if you try to run it as
Mm.
a business. Yeah.
Yeah, we might touch on that more later. One thing I will say is it's also that you're talking about a small business pool. You're talking about a small revenue pool. And I'm
Yeah.
reminded of from the article that was deleted and no one acknowledges, but which had a lot of very juicy pull quotes. But I think this FM guy saying one reason for inter-Nissan rivalry in the OSR was because there wasn't very much money. So
Yes.
you're looking to get the several hundred hardcore Kickstarter backers to look at your product and say,
Yes,
yeah,
they said it on Yiddish best, and
yeah,
God rest your soul, your dungeon is suck. All right, you'll never leave
yeah,
my heart. Okay, but no, they said it on Yiddish, and they said it best when they said um, the conflicts are so bitter because the stakes are so small. In fact, right?
yeah,
This is not people fighting over millions of dollars or the course of empire. This is the dregs and the mutants trying to fight over probably it's maybe like median level income and sometimes less. Yeah, that's uniquely vicious for sure.
yeah. Michael says that is the first lesson of original TSR no one seemed to figure out. I think Michael, you're referring to the idea of commercial drivers determining gameplay decision and gameplay products and stuff rather than hobby determining that. Which yeah, absolutely agree.
Almost always bad. There's
Yeah,
a few people that have managed to stay, I think, good despite going
mm,
full commercial. I feel I should probably stress that I before people start humming the Red Army choir whenever I go to Cauldron. Um, there's absolutely a reason for to if you do this whatever part time or semi professionally and all that stuff, charging money for something that's good and absorbs a lot of work is totally fine, right? That's in
yeah,
fact this is a way to guarantee like quality to get artists layout all this
mm,
crap. Like a part of it is
yeah,
just like real work. That's good, but I think having this as your sole sort of income, when you become dependent on it and you have to, at some point, normally you put something out and it's done, it's
mm,
complete, right? You put out a game and actually that game is fine, but if you run a business, then you kind of have to like create a need if you're smart for
mm.
new products, new materials, and it's not always to the good of the game.
Yeah. JP says, how do you make $1 million in tabletop? Start with two and work your way down. One, yes, absolutely. Two, of course, one thing that has warped that or changed that is the way in which Kickstarter has allowed for what seemed like they're not in the end. Creators don't get an enormous cut of the face value of the project necessarily, but
Pretty decent cut though.
yeah. But what I mean is, it's something where you're not seeing if someone has a several $100,000 Kickstarter, they're not getting $300,000 out of it. Is what I mean.
Uh,
There's thing to bear in mind about what you're actually paying for. But yeah, the point is
yeah,
that
yeah. I mean,
yeah,
Kickstarter takes its pound of flesh, and I mean, I remember the good old days
mm,
when James Malazowski kickstarted. He started with his little, I'm gonna make my tee hee hee. I'm gonna make my mega dungeon, my
mhm.
Dwemer Mount mega dungeon project, and it's going to be
Easy.
$2,000. And then oh shit, I made that in one day. Well, tee hee hee, for every 2,000, I'll make an extra level or something like that, and it ended up being like 64,000. It
Yeah,
was a huge disaster, and he had to
yeah.
I think
Well,
return part of that money.
there was early on. It was 2013 because it was something we backed after we got married, which was in 2013. Not you and I, Prince, just in case you're confused. Uh, but was a game called
Always.
Pyramid, which made a lot of money, and it turned out is what. But there was a kind of a miniatures board game with like you're adventuring in skyships. Cool idea. And it kind of ended up being half fulfilled, but that's not particularly important. But what happened was that they had a series of disasters, starting with the fact that the 3D printing company who had quoted them a really good quote, just disappeared. So they're like, okay, we now have to double the printing cost for the models and
Oh
stuff like
yeah.
that. And they were they added loads of stretch goals as they went. This was the wild west days of Kickstarter. And so yeah, I think you saw a massive, and I think
It
that, but
was
the point is,
a whole
what
era
did,
of
yeah,
petty scams that
yeah,
that are
as
now
well, yeah,
forgotten
yeah,
in the OSR as well. You get
yeah,
what is it? You get
indeed.
Mike Nistel, who still has I think two wayward Kickstarters or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
But yeah, I think the point though about Kickstarter is that
yeah.
it's not strictly the case, and in this sense, JP, I'll have to as I say, very slightly disagree with you as to whether or not, I agree people become vultures, but in terms of, is there some money for some people to have some kind of income? Yes. But is it your Prince's point, and I guess JP's point as well, is how far this becomes something you rely on becomes it perverts incentives, I think is the point.
Yeah, well,
or it can pervert incentives, put it that way.
yeah. I mean, if I look at it now, right, what I see is it's almost like a lot of these in the beginning when they started putting out new games. I was like, okay, fair
Hmm.
enough. Lamentations of the Flame Princess, all
Hmm.
right, very sort of quixotic, sort of its own. It has its own style. There's all these tweaks. There's improvements, or at least a simplified, streamlined encumbrance system, black powder weapons, all this stuff. So everything is tweaked. You're there's some appeal there, or
Hmm.
Adventure Conqueror King, again, also a great
Yeah.
example. Domain gameplay,
Yeah.
all this stuff. But now, if I look at a lot of these games that are coming out, like it's not the absolute worst. I don't hate them as much as Rules Lights. We'll get into those, but
Yeah.
the
Oh dear.
when I see these games, what is it, Dragon Slayer or
Mm.
Dolmenwood or Shadow Dark, I don't really see them as game, or even Knave 2E. I don't really see those as real games. What I kind of, and this is, forgive me if somebody is like a huge fan of that, but I get this idea that people, you have in the OSR, you have a template, you rearrange the furniture, you tweak some things, and then you run this game to kind of consolidate your fan base. And especially now, with maybe the OGL being less stable than it was before, with Wizards kind of like showing that, like, okay, listen, fuck you, we want to like maybe tinker with this. Um, this is just a way to kind of like, in case of Shadow Dark, a way to get your fans from 5e into the OSR. You kind of bring your own
Hmm.
system along. You kind
Yeah.
of, so you retain that relationship. Actually, you make it more top down. You consolidate it, and for others too, it's a way of like sort of like cashing in, um, and a way to like, I guess, better control
Mm.
what you're putting out, but it's not
Yeah.
necessarily good or even necessary.
Yeah, it's equally, it's not inherently sinister, in the sense, what I mean is it functions often as a branding exercise. You're not necessarily expecting people are going to run your rules. They might steal from them. We should talk, actually, I should say, and this is a positive thing potentially. One thing is that a lot of these rule sets are, in the heyday, there's some sense that people were putting out rules ideas or mini rule sets expecting them to be hacked and broken up. And there's this kind of very creative instinct that has its downsides. We'll talk about that, but I would just say, in some partial defense, is partly comes from that. It also partly comes, as you say, as a branding exercise, as a bridge from 5e to say, look, here's a game you can have. A couple of
I
comments.
always I
Yeah,
always think that's the worst possible pitch you could give me. Like, look, here's my game. It's really easy to alter. Like any of the dumb fuck decisions I've
well,
made,
we, we,
you
we,
can
we should. I
adjust it
mean, we
immediately.
should talk about that. We should talk about that. Yeah. Olive Chutney, Simon.
Yeah,
He sums up the problem as, "Arg, I bought BX again."
I bought it
It's like,
again. Yeah.
yeah. Brian,
Don't
who has
worry. This
bought
time it
many,
has. Oh,
Brian
yeah.
has bought
Go
many
ahead.
versions of BX, as he will agree in the comments. But yeah, you're right, Beach, that TTRPG Kickstarters are basically more reliable. It is actually fair to say,
They
as
are.
much as there are some scams,
I
it's
agree.
something where I think the fact that the overhead is fairly low and you can fulfill a PDF product comparatively easily if you're not insanely lazy. Um,
Or
like,
incompetent. Yeah. No, I,
yeah,
I
yeah,
I agree with that.
yeah.
It's not that Kickstarter is
Yeah,
unreliable. Far
it,
from that.
yeah. It's a lot better than it used to be. But I suppose we brought it up because the fact it had a major impact on the OSR ecosystem as as a way of organizing money. It was an organizing principle for money, basically, I think is the relevant thing.
Yeah, I think it still holds up, right? Or is
Yeah,
you still see people using it.
yeah,
It's
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
I mean, if
And
if
it's not, yeah.
Alexander Macros can kickstart uh Acts 2 on it, then it's pretty much a free zone. It's
Mm,
politically neutral as far as anybody in the OSR is
mm,
concerned, right?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, indeed. It's something everyone will use, and they can choose not to back stuff or whatever. But yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, in terms of, we're hitting in our potted history, which was sort of analyzing the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. By the way, Edward Gibbon was a crank, absolute massive crank. But on topic, examining the decline and fall of the OSR, yeah, we're at a point in the mid tens, sorry, where I think you begin to see some of this divergence and splitting. And I don't think it has to do with the end of G plus, but I do think the outraged response to people using MeWe was indicative of something that was happening, which was a sort of social, partly political. I don't think as political as people think it is, but like a polarization, a cultural polarization inside the wider old school revival, old school Renaissance movement, or discussion space. Let's call it. Movement is a bad term. Discussion space.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, there is one underlying rule to almost every conflict or feud in the OSR, which claims to be political. It's actually about money. It's actually that you have two people that are in the same sort of in the same they could have the same audience, and that
Yeah.
means that they're mortal enemies. So now,
Yeah.
as soon as you get into the you just use that polarization. It's like
Yeah.
the map has altered, the rules have altered. So now suddenly, what is it? Daniel Fox is in a conflict with RPG Pundit, right? Oh, and they
Yeah.
both happen to make a grim dark fantasy game. Put it out in the same. What a coincidence! Gee,
What a
like
coinky dink.
it's
Yeah.
it's very often it takes
Mm.
that shape, right?
Yeah.
Where you have people uh, uh, that are virtually identical in belief systems,
Mm.
and basically one with a minor difference. They're screaming and calling each other Nazis, because they again, this is expedient. You're just trying to get
Mm.
at somebody's you're trying to get at somebody's stuff.
Yeah.
Whether or not you believe it, fucking, I don't know, right? But very
Yeah.
often, I think that's the case. There are a few exceptions, I think, like say the what is it? Again, we discussed him previously. Alex McCreese, and
Macris.
Macreese, yeah, from the Macreesian. No,
Yeah.
that guy is like is properly cancelled. But this is such a rare case where he's actually involved in like one of the landmark cultural
Mm.
moments that maybe
Yeah.
this was instrumental in
Yeah.
kicking off this whole
Mm.
polarization, or at least like heavily involved. So
Yeah.
this is what do you call that, a black swan moment. We
Yeah.
don't have to
I was
like
assuming that's what. Yeah.
completely analyze that.
Yeah.
Most conflicts about censorship are actually,
Yeah.
or political
Yeah.
opinion, are actually
Yeah.
motivated by petty greed, and it's just an
Well,
ultimate
this is the FM Geist thing.
strategy.
This brings us back to that article. That article is both horrifying, very illuminating, and also kind of darkly funny, for reasons we probably won't go into. But the pull quote of FM Geist saying the reason that there's so much of this backbiting is because we're all looking at the same pool of money. I do think that's a really significant point. I don't think that's everything. You don't want to reduce when people have material disagreements about something. But I think you look at a lot of this stuff, and when it's over persons and individuals, it seems, as opposed to about kind of wider issues of game design or something, it does seem to be heavily influenced by that because of the issue of the money. By the way, Michael says he's the worst TTRPG customer ever. I've got my AD&D and travel books forever. I just spend some money on Goodman Games for some of their ore line. Yeah, I buy mostly. I basically buy only secondhand stuff off eBay, and at this point, AD&D is expensive on eBay, so I don't really buy AD&D anymore. But I do buy Classic Traveller, which is still. Do not buy anything on Classic Traveller; it'll push the price up because I want to buy it. But yeah, it is an interesting thing that I think for me, I buy fairly little new products now. I buy some, but not very much. I don't know about Prince.
Um, I I use most of the I use the revenue I get from my occasional shilling on on my blog. I mostly use
Yeah,
that to, if I ever get an RPG, I'll just use store credit, right?
yeah.
Um, the exception is maybe I'll get, like, I have Broken Castle, I have Castles in
Great.
Tillian. There's a bunch
Yeah,
of Anthony
yeah.
Huzo
I
stuff that was on sale.
yeah,
I got all of
yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, I buy that stuff. Yeah, so I basically buy from creators I really like. So Anthony Huso,
sure.
Gaborlux. I'm actually behind on an order from Gabor, which is just a case of you got to, at this point, it's partly because a lot of my game buying, I should say, a lot of the stuff I do buy is stuff I can now do with my kids, particularly my eldest son. So like that
My
also
cats peed
influences
on
that.
a Gabor
Yeah,
map pack, but my wife managed to get it out with what is it,
yeah.
with baking soda. So it's one of
And
the
now
reasons
you've
I love
got
her.
brand new slippers made from cat.
No, 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 no. This would have to be big ass slippers too. Those
Yeah,
things are huge. But
yeah,
no, right? Yeah, on occasion I'll
yeah,
get some
yeah,
RPGs, but like I think pretty much everybody in this hobby, you have more stuff than you can run in a lifetime. Oh, I also got
yeah.
I got Axe 2 and Axe 3. Um,
Mm.
as well. I think
AX2,
I even
AX3,
got
yeah.
into the AX. Yeah, I even got into the Axe 2 Kickstarter. It's
Mm.
true.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say, I think the thing about content is that, yes, if you're just like, I want to buy a lot of adventures or something, adventures are runnable, but at some point you're often like, I have lots of adventures. So I think it works as a pressure on what you're buying. I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
how many game
I
systems like do you need, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I would say Beach says so. This is a direct answer to that. Not that he knew you were going to say it, but part of it is I want to incentivize people to keep making new stuff, even if I don't think I'll get to it. Yeah, I think there's a degree of of patronage. I certainly know people who take that mindset of, including people on my Patreon, who are very much like, look, here is just some money as a kind of minor incentive to just keep writing stuff or keep doing stuff. It's not really there to actually get content. The content may or may not be useful, but it's
Well,
just a kind of yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah,
totally legitimate.
yeah,
I guess I kind of do that too.
mm,
But I will say that's another one where if everybody takes that mindset,
mm,
um, but nobody ever uses something, you
mm,
at some point I feel the more degrees your the ideal situation is that everybody that these games, these are living things, right? This is not, it's
mm.
not a book per se, it's a game, it's a group activity. That's its most
Mm,
if we're going to get philosophical, its most platonic, truest expression of the game is if it's being played. But
mm,
I guess the more you step away from that, and in this case, totally understandable, very normal. But the more you step away from that, I think the more um, weird outgrowth or mutation you start to see. Where
yeah,
at some point,
yeah.
people are, you get books that maybe it's you love the creator, you love maybe considering what the
Mm.
game would be like, but you don't actually uh,
You don't have the
play
time
it,
to
and
run
then
it. You
nobody
can't. Yeah,
else does so either, and you get this coffee table
yeah,
book.
yeah.
Awful.
I think the Hot Springs Island. I should say, just to correct Prince, he does not mean it's the platonic form of the game because that would simply be a mathematical ideal in a different reality. He means
The
it's
idea,
the
yeah.
Aristotelian telos of the game, the purpose
Okay,
of the game.
sorry.
That is what he
Yes.
means. Just
Yes.
that's
I've
very
never read
important.
Aristotle
Yeah,
nor Plato.
yeah.
Sorry.
I
Yeah.
once read, I once read the lead on an article about Plato.
I have read Michael Stackpole
Yeah,
though. That's true.
mm.
Yeah.
I have read Michael Stackpole. X-Wing has so much about this.
the the telos of writing a book that's basically doing the Death Star run again. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
and
just on a
again,
smaller
and again,
scale with less
and
pilots.
again,
Yeah.
and again.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
The guy, I actually respect him because he's one of those writers. He's not at all a good writer, but his writing is so completely clear that you can just like flick over it and ignore the fact it's bad. Whereas there are definitely writers I've read, I'm like, you are both bad, and I have to pay attention to your awful writing. Whereas Stackpole is
Oh,
just like,
it's
yeah,
like you're reading it in like it's written in Latin essentially
yeah,
by Julius Caesar.
yeah, yeah. The Acid Shark, yeah. Dungeoneer's Handbook from
Oh,
3.5, the
oh,
most
oh.
important game, the most important book. Becker
Well,
is
give me
also wondering
one
about oilseed
small
rape in
chat.
2024.
Give me some a
Yeah,
small chance to respond on the
yeah,
acid shark, because on
yeah,
Pedantic we actually used to do that where we would be all be in a video call, and I would say it's that time of the month again, and we would go through these bestiaries from the third edition, and then at some point you see, hey, there's a lot of golems here. There's a lot of orc blade ragers, and spell fondlers.
Um,
Oh, 50 new oozes. Wow, and a fire spider. Wow, yeah, it's they got
yeah.
so lazy. Yeah.
Did you prefer the Orc Blade Raider or the Rage Blader?
Yeah, exactly. It's but and then
Yeah.
that became the that became the what do you call that? The benchmark for 4E. That's
Mm.
where they started.
Yeah,
Oh, we
yeah,
have to talk about
yeah,
what the state of the OSR is now, I guess.
yeah. Yeah, so as we've said, due
This
to the
is
war
all
in Ukraine,
necessary.
oilseed rape is now more valuable than it was.
We have to
But
begin with
yeah,
the founding
beginning.
of Kiev
Yeah,
and the invention of dice.
yes.
So-
So as the Vikings travelled down the Dnieper and
no,
Dniester,
but
playing their games of
okay,
luck with the god
sorry.
Loki.
But right, digression aside, there was indeed this period of like I think
Hmm.
Google Plus was already
Yeah.
maybe so my personal theory is that everybody who interacted a lot on Google Plus got some sort of was infected with some sort of mimetic cognitive hazard and just lost every all knowledge of like
It was
the
Snow
normal
Crash.
old
It was
school
Snow
gaming.
Crash.
Yeah, it was Snow Crash. They got some sort of what is it, some sort of new Babel virus that
Yeah,
fucked up their brain.
yeah.
Removed all knowledge institutionally. But no, whenever when they came out of that, that's when I really started to see like the fucking rot. Or if I'm a little bit more charitable, which I won't be, I guess there was a major, for me, a very clearly perceptible difference between um, two groups. This was a lot easier to see then than it was in the beginning. It seemed more a difference of degrees in the beginning, and in the post Google Plus era, the post cognitive hazard brain damage era, like one group, you suddenly get this fascination with ultralights, with totally rules neutral. People
Mm,
are basically just these principles of OSR design that before they very often there's some what is it, a rulings not rules,
mm,
what's another good one, the answer is not on your character sheet, great. um, Very often this has there's a context to this, but a lot of the
yes.
newer people getting in, they don't really have that context at all. So you get a massive, I think it's called like something like divarication, John C. Wright novel. But the point is that just the information quality massively degrades, and you
Yeah.
see it in the stuff that's coming out to the point where one corner of the OSR is putting out stuff that would be really useless or almost even unrecognizable to the other corner. So one
Yeah.
corner kind of
Yeah.
stayed kind of like more traditional and closer to the original games, and the other one goes into the deep end with its experimentation. Until now, all they do is produce like a different flavors of one-page rules lights, which are frankly worthless to anybody in the other
I
camp.
think it's interesting. But by the way, JP does say he likes the dungeon punk art from G Plus era. I'd say G Plus certainly. There's a lot of fun things that come out of that. I think Prince's joke, but the joke with a bite, is definitely about the fact that there are probably social norms that were created there. But I think there's a lot of good stuff that is created on G Plus. I
What
only
was
was
the
involved
what
in
was
G
the
Plus for
era
like the last year.
of G Plus?
Um,
What in your mind, when was this height? Like this is,
well,
to me,
JP
this
is
is
just
the,
mentioning art.
yeah.
He's just talking about art in this
Oh
context.
yeah, the scrap princess era. Yeah, of course.
What I was going to say is the phenomenon, by the way, of coalitions like that break up is hardly unique to tabletop gaming, and you can very obviously see it in just read political history, right, uh, or whatever. Look at the founding of America as an example, and the fact you realise that Adams and Jefferson have almost kind of totally opposite views, at least in 1787, of what nations are for and how they work. The point is that happens regularly. And here, I think the revolution, if you like, if you want to think of it as an old school revolution, it's against wizards. But then you've got your radicals and you've got your conservatives after the revolution, and eventually that becomes clearer.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I think it's probably also just yeah, the political winds change, and you have a lot of institutional power, so you use that to immediately deny access to markets, to a segment of your. I guess this is where it does get kind of strange, because it's not just a segment of your competitors. but the audience also
Mm,
gets sort of cut off or has trouble operating, and then it gets a little cloudy.
yeah.
Sure, that's
I-
going
I'm
on.
I'm ascribing at some level. I'm being generous in a sense about motive by just saying part of it is that people naturally did have different interests. That's what I'm saying.
Oh yeah,
Is
that's true.
it's yeah. Beach does riff. If ruling's not rules, is peak gaming. Why aren't we all just playing FKR? I do think it's a notable thing that for all the fact you get an article occasionally on someone's blog about how they finally realized how much they hate D&D and how they're just playing this kind of like
FKR.
two stat FKR. Those games don't last, but there are people who can do that, but you have to be many things that are not a referee to be good at that. We have uh, D20 cool things you can find in the acid shark's left in most trenchcoat pocket. Yep, good.
That's the current OSR. Yes, well, we'll get into the
Yeah,
cargo cult part of it as well.
yeah. Becca says he would think G plus was its peak was 2013 to
That
14.
that sounds about right. I think
Yeah,
to me, OSR at its prime would have been, yeah, 2014, 2012, something like that. And then later on, you kind of notice sometimes there's something good coming out, but
yeah.
yeah, it gets worse.
Yeah, I only really got into G Plus at the tail end, the last year or so of it before they shut it down. Hence why I'm aware of the MeWe War. The MeWe War was like one of those border conflicts that Britain and America would have in like 1830 over 100 square miles of land in Oregon or something, where Becca's ancestors obviously lived. And it'd be like there was one man wounded and 7 pigs or something. The MeWe
Right.
War, I think, but it was a symptom. My point earlier when I mentioned that was it's a symptom where you're like, oh no, we can't go to MeWe because of this thing, and you think it's tough because like surely maybe some people were sincere in that. Absolutely, it was not. MeWe was not actually full of Nazis. It turned out. But the point is
Oh,
that
what a surprise. Usually
yeah,
when there's a witch hunt to get, all of these
it's,
radicals out, then it always turns out that there were actually way more than everybody had thought. And there's always like just
yeah,
such a great paper trail and so much evidence.
so
It's
much proof. Yeah. But
yeah.
the point is that that some people I'm sure were sincere, but I think again for other people, some of it was about which ecosystem people preferred afterwards and the desire to control the ecosystem afterwards.
Yeah, but there's
Yeah,
something I so I think I'm inclined to be a little bit less charitable very often because I think there's an element of willful deception and subversion um, in it, where it's not just like, oh, haha, we I guess we just both prefer different things. Wink, wink. It's
yeah,
more that actually I've really always had this opinion, but only now that like the conditions have changed, I'm no
mm,
longer willing to pretend to tolerate your, I don't know, in this case, your
whatever it is.
favor of
Yeah,
old school gaming, which I actually hate.
yeah, yeah,
So right now, I'll just say that it's lame and make you feel unwelcome, right? That sort of stuff. There was a lot of that, and that's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's just scumbag behavior, lowest of the low.
Becca does slate Oregon. I know we have some other West Coasters in the chat today, so if anyone wants to make war upon him, be my guest. I don't have mods, so you know. I remember once I watched the complete tangent, but on the note of Canadian weddings, which was relevant to you, a friend of
Yeah.
mine was getting married during the plague years and was like, "Here's the link," and sent out like the YouTube link, the YouTube live link, except it wasn't a private video. So in the comments, there were just like ASMR stoners filtering in watching this wedding. Um,
Okay.
so
Well,
I was just like,
better
"Hey,
than N-word
let's talk about the
towers,
Christian
I
religion while we're
guess.
here." But
Yes. Yeah.
I took the opportunity, you know.
Yeah.
GG movement both serves the Gamergate for the MeWe War and G plus going to Christian names and dying. I because of doxing things and stuff. Yeah, it's interesting actually that yes, without picking that apart as a as you said, big black swan cultural moment. Um, it certainly you can see its downstream effects on why was MeWe contentious when of course it wasn't contentious. Well, because people associated it with this other stuff thing where they felt they needed control of the ecosystem. Uh,
Yeah, you kind of get into wider
yeah,
uh you get into like wider cultural phenomena on
mm,
like why
yeah,
this polarization took place.
yeah,
This is a topic that's larger than this broadcast, I
yeah.
think.
It
We
is,
should
however,
yeah.
lizard men masquerading as humans.
Well, I don't call them
Y-
that, Owen. I
Yeah,
have different
that's not
names
that's
for
yeah. I've got different.
them.
The best was when the guy who done the original. So yeah, so classic example of the issue of this kind of ecosystem changing and people wanting control over stuff. Yep, and yeah, we do have our response from from the Oregon territory, the Counter Strike there. Yeah, so yeah, I think you start to see. I do think yes, you can't escape polarization, and the changes are not just to do with taste over game, but are to do with other cultural currents. Um, and you see that come up with stuff of this, and it's definitely partly to do with taste that some people genuinely do want. I mean, let me give a best case scenario of this in terms of what people want from it, and it's partly just based on actual reality of my own experience, of your experience, I'm sure as well. Is um, friends who played my fourth edition game didn't massively. No, they half learned fourth edition. They were willing to learn a bit, but they're not massively into it as a system. They liked the game, they liked to hang out with their friends, but it was
Right.
whatever.
Yes.
And other people are much more in the same group. Were much more like, I want to be really good at this game. I want to make good decisions. I want to kind of work out how to get my character to be powerful. They were much more into what, in traditional terms, the RPG side of it. And both of those are, in terms of normal human social functions, normal and legitimate. I think the idea that anyone who isn't as obsessed with the minutiae of tactics and mechanics is some sort of crazy parasite. We obviously have encountered that. That's obviously not healthy as a way to see your social
O-
circles.
Okay. All right. So this has to do with like so many problems
Mm,
in the world. It is more a problem, I think, of ratio. So
hmm. Yep.
there's this article. What is it? Geeks, mops, and social fallacies. No, it's
Hmm.
Geeks, mops, and sociopaths. That's the article. But it kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
describes the lifespan of a hobby. In maybe put it in the description because that's what happened to us essentially. But the
Mm,
point is that yes, it's perfectly acceptable to have a couple of. Usually, you have a
hmm.
few people in these ecosystems that are. These people are really dedicated, really committed, really into the hobby, know a lot, do a lot of volunteering, do a lot of it, put in a lot of extra hours.
Hmm.
And there's people who are just there to have a good time. They're there to coast. They don't really want to get like too deeply involved, but they like it, and that's perfect. You need those people too,
Hmm.
but if you have too many of those, and if
Hmm.
your hobby starts to cater too much to those, right, that you can really
Hmm.
only do that by lowering the barrier of entry and removing all of the specific stuff. Uh, you get you get a bizarre sort of inverted relationship, right, where the most uh, what would be the most like dedicated and committed, knowledgeable people are
Hmm.
actually these are perceived actually as enemies because they're going to be very difficult. They're not
Yeah.
going to be okay with you massively simplifying everything in order to
Hmm.
cater to a large audience of casuals. In fact, they're going to be like hostile. So now they have to be destroyed, right? And that's the
And
I
that
think
man's
that's the
name
new
is
yeah.
EOTB.
No, yeah, well, right. EOTB would be a perfect example of
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
somebody who's like again who's played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons for
Mm.
uh
80
Jesus
years.
20 300 years. That's right, and
Yeah.
counting. But yeah, that's you're going to have a totally different kind of like thing that you're trying to get from the game, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
feel a good fan base is or a healthy fan base,
Mhm.
at least in my mind, it's
Yeah.
oriented around um you have a few people that are again that are both fanatics and also like very creative. Then you have like a sort of like outer shell of like people that are that maybe don't have a huge output but that are like very
Mm.
knowledgeable, all that stuff. And then around that sort of like you have successive layers of casuals, and I don't trust
Yeah.
people that market only to like casuals or try to cater only to them and are really and any attempt to advance or put some standards in place that's treated with hostility. I have a
Yeah.
instinctive inherent distrust of that.
Yeah. I think no, I don't disagree. I think it's an interesting thing. One thing is also that the online space is disproportionately weighted. This is actually an irony or a confusion. The online space is disproportionately weighted towards people who seem motivated. See, when I talk about my in-person group that had like 7 players, and like half the players were really, well, maybe like 2/3 were really into the game. A couple of them were like, hey, I enjoy the game, but I'm enjoying being with my friends. That's the main point I'm here. That's something which is a dynamic of normal mixed groups of people. Whereas online, the
Yeah.
weird thing is actually that technically everyone is motivated. You've gone on to Discord or G Plus or whatever to talk about this. But I think what you can see is that for some people, it's that what they're interested in is the social mesh of the game. And I think about, hear about creators who play every couple of months and play a rules light, basically. And that's obviously like, okay, what they want from this is the creative social experience of hanging out with their friends and coming up with a story, and they don't feel they're benefited by the game. They're not interested in the game, and I think that's
Oh,
part of
oh, they
the
just want
that
the
yeah,
they want to
yeah,
LARP as artists, essentially.
yeah,
Okay.
um,
Yeah, that's
yeah. I
that's
was
a
going to
big
say
part of it too. Yeah.
JP does say all RPGs from the where it's rude to be bad at WoW. So yeah, the idea, that can create the social tension that some people are also demanding everyone else be as good or as obsessed as they are. Hello, good evening, Gene.
All right. But yes, and I was going to say, um, well, so post G plus with this
Hmm.
again,
Yeah.
the OSR was still again still attracting new people. Commercially, it was also still again potential was still growing. Kickstarters were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's all working out. But I think we've currently, and I may have warned about this, or at the very least, I kind of like saw it coming with this art punk stuff where I was like, this is wait a minute, this has nothing to do with I don't like this.
Hmm.
This has nothing to do with the D&D I like. Why is this? At some point, you start to think, hey, wait a minute, why is this even here? What does this have to do with D&D, right? But the this more and more people have been moved in, and the understanding of like what the OSR was or what it is supposed to be about has, uh, I guess, broadened would be a good euphemism for it. But it's been expanded again and again and again until now. There's like a vague idea of what it is, right? And it's
Hmm.
very, very difficult to even if you go in some of these online spaces to discuss it at all, right?
Yeah.
There's there's even a culture too where, and you see this most on God help you if you go there, but the Reddit OSR, for example, is a great idea of a place where it's basically impossible to discuss an idea, because whatever you it's always going to come down to somebody asks something and then somebody else gives advice. But then if you're trying to figure out like, well, why is this the case? Or if you take umbrage, then it's always like, well, just do what feels nice, or oh, this is my truth, and there's no there's there's nothing to really point at. There's no the idea that you have a shared ethos is just it's very blurry and vague, right? And
Yeah.
this makes discussion impossible, right?
A really interesting thing in terms of Reddit. Here's a really Reddit I have great respect for,
Yeah,
which is the Kingdom Come Deliverance Reddit. Basically, because
right.
every day there are people complaining about how hard the game is, and everyone in the comments is like, just shut up.
Shut
And you
up,
think,
get
okay,
good.
yeah.
Yeah.
And at some level, you're like, maybe this isn't helpful. Maybe some people need a bit of encouragement, and that is true. But you're
No.
like, there is some degree of community gatekeeping there,
Well,
which
so
functions.
with community gatekeeping, it's always a trade-off, right? You can have
Yeah.
and that the amount of gatekeeping is going to determine the amount of fanatics the ratio of fanatics, but it's also going
Mm.
to determine like the total size or growth potential. So it's always going to
Yeah.
be a trade-off, right?
Yeah. By the way, JB Becker says it's like he's talking about the issue of you're already motivated if you're coming online. Just going online for info is a sign of motivation.
Yeah, that's
Um,
true.
and yeah, so I think this actually is an interesting question. We should move on, I think, into now you're saying it's hard to identify. We should move on in a moment to what is there now? What's the ecosystem now?
Sure.
Um, but I think what's worth saying is part of it's not a mystery necessarily, but something that's worth reflection on if you're interested in intellectual history. It's worth looking at why, if everyone is motivated, why has the ecosystem become so skewed towards Prince is kind of complaining about all those casuals, he's that guy. But why has an ecosystem become skewed towards that, or at least in terms of the
Uh,
big games
oh,
getting sold? And I think that's worth thinking about, because everyone coming online is motivated. So why has it ended up apparently not rewarding that?
oh no, I don't think. Sorry, if I'm the casuals is not the that's not the that's like the facilitator, I guess.
Mhm.
The problem
Yeah.
is actually is people that, as you say, are motivated. It's just that their motivations are antithetical to somebody would be into original Dungeons and Dragons. They're
Yeah.
actually uh they um they're antagonistic almost to old D&D, or at least their view on it is very dim, besides the few things
Mhm.
that they've managed to cobble and take for their whatever they're like, okay, no, the OSR, this is a game, this is a play style, these are some vague principles that we
Mhm.
adhere to. And everybody who's into old school D&D, no, that's old and clunky, and we use modern game design. Lord help you, whatever that means, modern game design. the
Yeah.
um the point is that yes, they are people that are motivated, but they're motivated in a different direction. That's why the current state of the
Mm.
OSR, I think, is, on the one hand, a sort of, I guess we can call it a disintegration. There's not enough consensus. I guess you still have one sort of, you kind of like the ultra light, rules light post OSR corner, still sort of pulling in one direction. There's a lot of major creators that have managed to eke out an existence, like Gavin Norman, Kelsey, that'll just sort of remain coasting, try to
Mm.
keep it stable. Ben Milton, I guess, too,
Mm.
with Nave too, E,
Yeah.
um, Alexander Makris, that sort of stuff, and I guess quite promising on my view. We have at least there does seem to be a sizable group of people that actually are still very much interested in the kind of like the original old school gaming scene,
Mhm.
and and want to keep playing that, want to sort of like explore and learn about that, and they are now starting to sort of cohere into this, what is it, classic fantasy gaming, or
Yeah.
classic adventure gaming, however you want to
CAG,
call it.
FAG. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, FAG, yeah, CAG,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, Gree said his speculation as well is because easier rules lights are easier to sell. I'll return to that point in a second. Becca points out in relation to that, sometimes then motivation morphs into making an easy buck, which again we'll return to. Jean says, in a sense, you almost want, can we all agree there is just this one set of rules we use, and then your house, everything else is.
Oh yeah.
It's appealing, but of course it's inevitable that people will always be creating, but yeah, absolutely, I
Is it
understand the desire.
you
Um,
sometimes you hear these conversations, right? And it's like, well,
mhm,
I'm making a
yeah,
hack of like black hack and knave, and I'm trying to combine that with Karn, and I think like this person has brain damage. This has nothing to
yeah,
do with anything. What is going on? What are you
yeah,
doing, right?
yeah. The Move hack, my Move hack. Yeah,
This is
indeed. So yeah,
you're watching an alien
mm.
trying to replicate behavior that they've observed from some sort of tape
Well, and
in
we've
order to
all,
convince its
I
fellows that
suspect,
this is one of them.
we've all been tempted by it. I suspect we've all done a bit of it. We come up, we want to put something else. Like at one point, I quite liked unified save, not single unified save, but kind of as in like descriptive threefold third edition
Oh yeah.
type save. And I was
Oh,
like, oh
that's
well,
fine.
maybe
Yeah.
yeah, maybe you could adapt that in. I just don't care now. It matters so little to me. But like, it's not that I think it's a bad mechanic, and I think we become tempted by the tinkering because it's exciting. It's fun to tinker, and especially when it's lonely fun. It's something you can do when you're not playing the game,
Uh,
and if you don't,
well,
I think that's
yeah,
part of what's going on.
I think we did discuss that at some point, that
Yeah.
um, the the impulse to sort of tweak a game is not bad, right?
Yeah.
It's actually something that, like, as you play more and more and more, you're going to make house rulings and
Hmm.
all that stuff. That's fine, but to do this in such a compulsive way, and to
Yeah.
like turn that activity into I don't know. This is foreign to me, alien.
Yeah. There's it's I think there is a broader philosophical point about do we see what washes out? Do we try to share common language and common systems? I was reading Washington's farewell address recently. He kind of makes a point about the fact is like you will not know the effect of the things we already have done until many years hence. So you need to be patient and you need to work out what's going to happen, how they're going to pan out, um, and stuff like that. And I think there's a thing there that other people will take a very different view. No, you must always be attempting to kind of perfect what you're doing now, like just constantly tinker. And almost part of the point is to come up with the perfect system. Whereas the shared language of AD&D, I mean, Gene makes the point. I'll just pop it up. That AD&D 1E is really core D&D with. He describes it as the Greyhawk house rules with Gary's development of his OD&D rule set. Yeah,
There's something
and
to
yeah,
be said for having
there's a
at
there's a
least a shared frame of reference for
there's a
sure.
common
Yeah,
language. There's a common
yeah.
language there. Michael does make the point. When you have a small a kind of a fixed ecosystem of motivated people, in this case, motivated gamers, you tend to of course, that works both ways. You both get the one true D&D. Did you know that if you're not using weapon
One-on-one
speed in the
time.
way that
Yes.
one time, or you're not using weapon speed in the way I describe in my blog, then you're not really playing D&D. Or you get, and this is maybe what has most happened in the public spaces of the so-called OSR. It goes the other way of there. The purity spiral is about people having preferences that seem exclusive rather than open.
Oh
I
no,
guess.
that's yeah,
So
that's
yeah,
just as fatal. But let's address
yeah, yeah,
that. I do think it's worth considering that yes,
yeah.
you
Hmm.
can be too insular, and
Hmm.
if you're all very extremely dedicated and motivated about something, then probably yes, at some point conflict is inevitable. So you need some sort of equilibrium.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I feel there's probably a couple of stable configurations that work. You can either it, it, right. It's all about what you're trying to achieve and do. There's nothing inherently wrong with making a sort of, I think we've called it a big tent. EOTB has called
Yeah.
it it keeps talking about a big tent. There's nothing wrong with a big tent, right? Where you make a sort of larger um,
Hmm.
community. They all play some variant of like of D&D, but it's like basic OD&D and AD&D together. But you have
Yeah.
to know what you can expect from people, and it'll have rules of conduct that kind of contribute to that or can be detrimental. And the same applies to smaller groups for sure.
Yeah, no, indeed, and I think that that's an issue of common language, which is, and I should say, in one way, that we almost don't need to observe that need because that's what has led to, essentially, when we talk about the state of the OSR, we actually sort of mean what's been uh, described for a couple of years now, but the death of the OSR. There's, I think, the idea
Okay.
that you've got to a point where there's no meaningful common denominator, there's no meaningful shared space. They're just different things. Yeah, there's the post OSR, the POSR, let's
Well,
call it.
the problem with the death of the OSR is that always the same sour grapes were always announcing its death every year. Like the people that
Mm,
are, for whatever reason, sort of in it or at the edges, they won't leave, but they keep saying it's dead. Right? It's like a um, ah, like yeah. Will can we go back? No, but can we? You know, is it possible to identify what drew people to the original games, and is that a thing that exists and not just a product of fashion or the vagaries of time? I think so. I think there's probably a few qualities to old school gaming that are inherently appealing, right? That are inherently viable. So there's really no reason why you can't you can't keep that going. There's still again, there's still people interested in it. There's people making stuff for it. That's all going to be fine. And for I guess the people in the post OSR going off into this far unknown on some vague uncharted course, I say, well, I wish you luck. It's probably good that that there's some distance between the two groups to reduce all this friction. Who gets to keep the
So
house though? Who gets to
yeah,
keep the chairs? Yeah.
well, I mean, I think this is actually kind of part of what I'd get at is I actually think descriptively, in terms of the old shared space, the issue is that as there are no shared spaces in the same way there were, the
Yeah.
OSR, as the OSR you're describing is the OSR that's interested in old games, but and this is just this is almost a trivial aside, but the point is that the OSR Discord, the one that has that name, the OSR Reddit, lots of other OSR spaces heavily skew, not all, but heavily skew towards what some people call a new school revival approach. They're much more,
Oh,
yeah.
well,
So yeah,
the OSR Reddit is a
yeah,
pure. It's like just dead skin masked reptilians, dead skin mask, pure. What do you call that? Surface mimicry, shelfies, and like
simulacrum.
completely hollow. Yes, and
Yeah.
the OSR Discord, if possible, is even worse. What a yeah,
But the reason I point that out is that actually the
yeah.
phrase itself, and you already have hinted this by mentioning CAG, the phrase itself may not be what's important in terms of what we can say is people who are interested in a post Wizards of the Coast fantasy role playing space, which can be any kind of thing they want it to be. Great, that's whatever. People who are interested in reviving those early games, keeping playing them because they still have great value. That's a different thing, and that's much more coherent as an
Yes,
idea. Which,
yes.
yeah. Um,
And I think that yeah, that'll stay.
Hi, Marcelo.
And
Welcome.
I'm hoping for the inevitable moment when they're going to ban mention of Gary Gygax on the OSR Discord. That would be like perfect. That's I really shouldn't say that, but I know they will at some point. Inevitable. That's like such a beautiful victory lap. Then you can say, you are actually completely
Yeah,
you have become completely antagonistic towards
yeah,
what the very person that created or facilitated
yeah.
the thing that you claim to like
Yeah,
is now your
it's
enemy.
parasite, isn't it? It's parasite.
A pure
Um,
parasitism.
yeah,
Parasitism, yeah, for sure.
yeah. Yeah, they almost did it in DCC. And yeah, I think yes. I mean, and in it, as I said, this is somewhat by the by, but I think it's worth saying that part of what we mean when we talk about the state of the OSR is there is no set of shared spaces for all the people who are interested in both the original games and the sort of create hyper creative craft side of things. Lots of kind of like those have largely separated. I think that's a big thing to say is those have functionally separated. And whether or not they're OSR doesn't matter, but we are talking about there's now a space, I think more aimed, hence some people prefer this NSR new school kind of tag for that reason. And that I think is much more, much more emphasis on that sort of both the rules lights, but also the hacking stuff. And there's probably some fun stuff in there, but that kind of end of stuff. And then
Uh, I,
there's the
I'm
yeah,
also
sorry.
less positive about I guess that it's how I mean on the one hand I like it that there's no pretense that this has anything to do with um old school
AD&D.
gaming, but
Yeah,
yeah, again, just a bunch of I mean, nice art, right? But just a bunch of everything that is anything that is like so open and so vaguely defined,
hmm
it's inevitable. It'll be directionless, right? You'll never it'll move on before it gets any good. The brutal reality is that building up sophistication takes discipline and time and investment. And if you're just always sort of like carried along by the winds of the moment, you never get good at anything. You get maybe
yeah.
you get to make good art, I guess. But
hmm Well,
no,
of
I'm
course, that's because the people making the graphic art are people who have put time into becoming excellent at it. I guess is the point there.
for sure. Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, no, I think you're right. I mean, there is a general principle in life, and it applies to lots of things. You may apply it to marriage and to having children and to sculpting and to becoming good at piano,
and that rule is
whatever.
that you should
Yeah,
do whatever you want, whatever
yeah.
feels
Just don't
good.
don't
Yeah.
make any effort. Don't make any
Then
effort.
there's no
Um,
there's no good and bad answers. Yeah, that's right. It's
yeah,
just like in
but yeah,
parenting and in
yeah.
sculpture and in filmmaking. You should do whatever you want. Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, the point is these things require focus and discipline and time.
Correct.
And I think the fact that I said this is more heavy. This particular point is more heavy than talking about games necessarily. But the fact you're like, look, you're going to pick up on the value of your marriage and where it's got to and the development of your marriage after 40 or 60 years or whenever one of you dies. So that's the point at which you get to be like, was that a worthwhile experiment? Um, and so, and I think there's a general principle there, and it's certainly when we look at games, which are a small and not in many ways frivolous thing, there's still a similar thing that making really good systems and coming up with really good presentation of those games and stuff does take time. And I think, yeah, my personal inclination is in that kind of direction partly for that
Well,
reason.
I think this sort of burgeoning classical fantasy gaming movement, it's
Yeah,
uh it, it's always a trade-off, right? I think
yeah,
definitely in the beginning, and again, we have people who play a lot,
hmm
which is good. We probably won't have the same, creative momentum as something like the OSR had in its beginning days. But again, this is not the worst thing in the world. It's probably also a good idea to kind of like make the scope more fixed and
hmm
limited, because that way, you have a sort of frame within which you can work, and which is actually still
hmm
very broad. I think that's something that I and others have tried to illustrate with, like, say, pointing at, like, say, high level gaming, and going like, okay, wait a minute, this has existed for oh so many years and is barely explored. We can take a look at this. There's still island crawls you can do. There's a
yeah,
ton of
yeah,
unexplored avenues still, worlds still to conquer. But
yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
there's always a
I don't,
trade-off.
yeah, I don't think you look at the period between Giotto and I don't know, Cezanne or something, and think, do you know what? European art just ran out of ideas or formulations of the kind of the classical tradition. Like, it's that you can endlessly reformulate these things. So yeah, there is hope for creativity. I think what you perhaps do is here's me. This is not quite my devil's advocate. I of course am on Judge Holden's side. So now, but yeah, is that it is great to have that creative energy, those high vision creatives who, as much as we tease them, great layout, great art, great quality of paper, stuff like that.
Oh,
It's really fun. It's something where it is fair to say, in some senses, it's there's real value in that, the plastic arts, basically. But I think it's something where that and those people don't tend to be as attracted, I think, to fusty old 1977 books.
well, so in the beginning they absolutely were.
Mm,
We definitely, in the beginning of the OSR, like OD&D was the common
mm,
system, and people had very creative campaigns.
mm,
The I think the healthy state of a hobby is if you still have an ecosystem that allows these creative types that, in
mhm.
general, they're very good at coming up with ideas, but usually, like, they're bad at math. They don't, like, think well in systems. This is real,
Yeah,
by the way. Like, look at
yeah,
like Luca Rejek or Patrick Stewart. Again, very high, usually high verbal intelligence, very strong creatively. But then when it becomes time to, like, to integrate something, and you look at it, so you're like, this is horrible. Like the systems, some of these, what Luca Reject, the systems he comes up with, it's like just it's terrible. You look at it too, and you think, why does it exist at all, right? How does this
mhm,
fit into a framework? That's not a task that necessarily they're going to be the best at, right?
yeah,
And if you have a viable sort of hobby, then you need both types.
mhm,
You need people that are, the sort of like the precise, methodical, systemic thinkers, and you do need creatives. You do want them.
mhm,
It's good,
yeah,
right? It's the lifeblood of your um, of a hobby. Is very often, if people are still trying new
yeah,
things, they're making new adventures. So, I'm just saying that and we have them, we'll get them, right. But I'm saying that in the beginning, it won't be as high as it was in
mhm,
the golden age of the OSR.
yeah, yeah. Uh, I, and I wonder how far you might actually see some of that group of people, not in terms of people who are really interested in RPGs. I don't mean that, but how far people who are interested in kind of game culture and are very creative already have done and will move to other avenues within game creation. Like as in there'll be other things that are exciting and fun to do. Like I think the stability of a hobby is going to rely on not in terms of it doesn't need creatives, it does, but it's not going to rely on just, oh man, we just need those people, because some of those people don't really care about your game. They just like the creative impulse it gives them.
But
uh,
yeah,
yeah,
and I'm saying that that's actually fine, right? You
yeah, yeah.
you need artists, say, like people who
Hmm.
make art for RPGs. Brilliant. That's
Hmm.
fantastic. Like
Yeah,
we love that, and it's RPGs are an inherently creative medium, so
yeah,
it makes sense
absolutely, yeah.
that you know this is attractive to people who like DMs like making worlds, or
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
people have creative ideas. That's good. It's just that creativity needs to be fettered, right? It needs to
Hmm.
be channeled into
Hmm.
an outlet that the rest can kind of like use. And in
Yeah,
if the if again if you make something too small and impenetrable, then you're going to scare off the
yeah,
creatives. And if you make it too broad and too conducive to creatives, you get a lot of like stuff coming out, and everybody's like, "Wow, it's really creative." And then it's like, "Dude, does anybody ever play it?" No, no,
yeah.
it's fine,
I don't
right?
know about how much, setting aside the issue of whether it's played or not, you see the same with tabletop war games. I mean, board game war games. I'm
Right,
thinking of that. You have some really interesting creative side shifts and changes, and people being like, "Oh, here's a lighter system," because that's one big thing, is the idea that you got to a point of going from very basic Avalon Hill style SPI 1960s, early 70s games, and they get
sure,
heavier and heavier mechanically.
right,
And now you get people now who are like, oh, I want to be able to play a game in like an hour and a bit, and I want it
yeah.
to have this really clever mechanic. And these are often very clever games. So this isn't me saying it's the same as that guy on the blog, on that blog's crazy rules like that's terrible. I'm not talking about that.
It's not
But you can see some of
Karen
the
or
same
Knave
thing.
or yeah, okay,
Yeah, yeah,
sure.
yeah. Kenave fourth edition.
It's
Um,
Karen Hack, Knave,
yeah,
yeah, sure,
yeah.
whatever.
The guy,
That's
yeah, the
fine.
Mofac. We're calling it the Mofac. That's what the guys come up with.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Um,
no, no. Well, sorry. Please finish your point.
No, so yeah, I think I was just saying you see the same there, that um, there's a question about kind of what shared language there is, and the fact that some people plainly find the issue of shared language exclusive. This isn't going any deeper than that for now. We can talk about it maybe another time or something, but you can tell that is, one of the things is that shared language is necessary, but it can feel exclusive, accurately or not, you know. Yeah, so, and I think you
It's
see that
funny.
in parallel hobbies.
Yeah. That was the main theme of Michael A. Stackpole's novel, The Bacta War. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
Okay.
Where we get most of our philosophy from. Yeah, yeah. But what you're saying is what we need. What we need
No,
is for artists and layout people and people and creative writers to come into our wing of classical gaming, and
no,
embrace their
no. They should stay
Augustinian
out.
freedom to do good. They should give up freedom of choice and have the freedom to be good instead.
No, no, this is again, this is the broader point that you're making, right? Is that
Yeah.
it is true that if you have like games that are too I guess AD&D is actually a great example because
Hmm.
and I maintain this point that AD&D is not this is not a casual game, right?
No,
It really
no,
is
no.
not.
It is an
If you're
advanced game.
yeah,
An
right.
advanced game. Yeah.
Right, and if you get into it, especially with, I mean, people of course complain about the sort of the obtuseness and the kind of cryptic way it has been
Hmm.
written. That's part of it too, but it's also about this is about like grasping an ethos, and you'll get all these corner cases, and slowly
Hmm.
over time, this is something that once you become embedded in it, if you become familiar with it, if you encounter and you try things out, at some point you become like fluent. That's
Yeah.
uh, eh, that's great, but it's also it'll make it a bit harder for people to
Hmm.
get in there. That's a trade-off. That's
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
get something that's very
And
sophisticated and yeah,
yeah, we have Ian in the chat, obviously, and I know part of his view is I think he's very keen for people to come and play classical
yes,
games, classical adventure
yes,
games, but he's also quite keen on this idea that in the end, you've got to have essentially. I've heard it put a different way, but the idea you leave the back door open. There's some degree to which you want to make something defined enough and exclusive enough that it's very clear that all persons are welcome. Doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, what your
Yeah.
personal take, your whatever. But there is a game we're playing, and if you don't want to play that game in the way we're talking about, please do your thing, but elsewhere. Like there is that kind of that's the trade-off is you're accepting there's a degree of potential alienation.
Well, the potential alienation always exists in every
Mm,
group, right?
yeah,
The difference is if you're going to gatekeep, right? Will you gatekeep based on um, a person's perceived suitability to actually play and to play the game and contribute to like the surrounding community, or will you gatekeep based on something that's actually peripheral? It's a bad predictor for
yeah.
suitability like that, right?
Yeah,
But
like
you're going
hair
to
color.
gatekeep
You'll
anyway.
have to have the same hair color if you want to be on this D&D server. Is a bad predictor for playing good games or talking about games sensibly. That's your
I
point, isn't it?
oh, by the way, I agree with Mr. Stronghold there.
Yeah, yeah,
Once I went to 1E, I've not
yeah,
looked
yeah,
at any other system since. But
yeah,
no, yeah, the idea is that you're always going to, no group can be universal. I guess
yeah,
well, the church, you need to believe in the Almighty, right? But
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
you get what I mean, right? No,
yeah.
no group can cater to everyone's taste, and it's a
No,
bizarre reality
absolutely.
of tabletop gaming. But there are actually people that they're going to, it's bizarre, they're going to come into, they're going to see if your community does well, they're going to see that, and they'll try to attach themselves to it, and then they don't actually like it, right? They'll try to like change its fundamental nature so it now does what they do, not realizing that in changing its fundamental nature, they will destroy it. This is a completely separate issue from what happened with the OSR. I would never go so far as to say that this
Yeah,
this happened
I
and that
I
people
wonder.
have openly stated this, but yeah.
Yeah, I wonder. This feels like a question for Becca. I know he's repairing his stuff, but if he can get to a keyboard, but I wonder how far this is something you'd see in music culture in the time when music culture mattered, in the 90s to early noughties and stuff. How far you saw that happen in those cultures, subcultures. Gene says, yeah, he's on a server where they run games. It's an OSE server. But he plays AD&D there. I think, yeah, that's the thing is that there is I would say the really valuable thing you're doing there, not because everyone has to play AD&D, but in terms of as a way of offering this out to people who often do want to play a good and clever game, I think. Uh, yeah. And he says, in a way, you
Yes,
have to have people who both really want to play the game, but also it's not their main purpose in life, so they can do it without. They can basically, the fact that you don't agree with them doesn't matter that much.
that's
They can live with that.
a sort of the Tanalorn, yeah, the Zen
Yeah,
mindset. It's true, but
yeah.
no, and I think it's also good because the AD&D, getting into it is work, but it's also not rocket science. Definitely not
Hmm.
rocket science to be a player, um, and even for a
Hmm.
DM, like it's more work, and people shouldn't lie about that, or sorry, they shouldn't
Hmm.
what do you call it, reduce that or mitigate that. But it's also not like a million times more, right? It is achievable, right?
Hmm.
Playing AD&D, it is still D&D. It's actually the best
Yeah,
version. It's nice. If
yeah,
you're
yeah,
if you're a
yeah.
player, you're not like
Especially second
totally,
edition. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
What?
Well, it's again, this is sort of a blasphemous mockery.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Uh, but yes, no. Beck says, yeah, maybe you can apply the MOPS theory to music culture for sure as well.
For sure.
I think you see sometimes with fandoms turning on their artist in music. Actually, modern fandoms. I don't even mean like classic music culture fandoms, but turning on their artists because there's obviously a set of things where like actually we decided the music and the artist's identity were about this, and the artist has no interest in that. You can see people's disappointment. Um, in their artists. Probably the most similar aspects is lots of folks are pretty dumb. We're just playing these things because we like it. We don't start out wanting to change the world. I mean, that's a positive view in a good way. We're dumb and we just want to play. We want to enjoy the music or we want to play the game. Yeah. Um,
Whoever, well, like this is always we talk about incentives, and
Yeah.
this is a great example of where, unfortunately, there are incentives, right?
Hmm.
You like this hobby, you kind of like the idea of like having a community, and then suddenly there's also like, okay, I kind of also don't mind access to markets. I want a nice steady influx of potential new players as my DM. And then, suddenly you notice these other guys that you might not, you can't really get along with them, and they want the same player base. So then you
Hmm.
have to advocate for your system if you want it to survive. If you don't do that, y- your resources are going to dry up.
And
So
this is why
there is
Tupac
a
had to fake
stupid
his own
sort of
death.
competition to it, and that's fine. You just need to
Yeah.
channel that competition in a way that's mostly beneficial and constructive.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yes. So let's just wind back. I'm trying to think where we departed from, because I think there's some useful extra bits in there. But where were we? What were we saying? I think uh, he had said about you need to have people who want to play the game, but don't take it seriously. You'd suggest that
Yeah,
was the Tannerlawn. That was the Tannerlawn
it's like
point.
they say in Michael A. Stackpole's novel, The Krytos Trap.
Yeah.
Which is actually, coincidentally, that's the plot of it. But
Yeah.
yeah, you need people that are interested in it, but not to a degree where they're always having arguments, or they're always trying
Yeah.
to gatekeep or define a point where they're engaged. They're
Yeah.
capable of letting things go.
Yeah, the 2E DMG really was a terrible mistake. Something the amount I use it compared to the 1E DMG is so limited. I
I
think I've talked about
was
that with you before, E, but I'm just like, okay, so essentially, like, it's more like our friend Airdrie more or less says the same, doesn't he? Prince will be able to back me up on this. More or less, you're like, yeah, if you want to steal anything from 2E, you do it, and then you just use the 1E DMG with it.
it, I thought even the PHB when I ran it was Labyrinth of Madness when I ran
Yeah, you
that.
did run that, yeah.
I was annoyed by
Hmm.
the spell descriptions, just the
Hmm.
way it was written. It was very frustrating in a way, and in
And
a
the
way that
thing that,
I don't have with AD&D. Even though
mm,
AD&D also has
yeah,
ambiguities in it, it's the maybe the wishy-washy language, the way it's couched, is kind of like
yeah.
woolly. It's infuriating, absolutely
I
infuriating.
I only really struggle in that respect in terms of spell descripts, particularly, which is maybe the best example.
Yes.
I get annoyed about the fact that the distances are changed completely erratically. Some of them are in line with like polyhedron and dragon comments. Others are completely random. Some are in feet, some are in yards. There's a massive issue with that, but that I have to solve. But yeah, we'll have to have a charity fundraiser where for every like donation to a good cause, he has to come up with a sincerely good thing he likes about second edition. I think that's a future edition of this. But on the note of difficult to learn games, this is a thought I'd had that escaped in the ether while we were discussing the works of Swami Stackpole. But that I play ASL, and there are no players and DMs. There are just players. Everyone learns the rules right
Right.
if you're playing it. And there is a thing where you don't actually have to learn this 200 pages of dense text. That's not how it works at all. You learn it's modular. So to be clear, but you are learning a pretty serious game. And there's other games I've learned that are like that. That you are having to pick up and learn a complex game to play it. And it's a reason why ASL is a dying art in part. But I think the thing is, AD&D compared to that as a player is very easy coming in. I've taught many players, and for some players, it's the first edition they played. I mean, for one of my Greyhawk players, it was literally the first edition AD&D was the first edition he played. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I don't think that's that. And there are loads of examples I can think of, as in several examples I can think of, where AD&D is what I've taught people, and they're basically fine with it. It just depends what you expect them to pick up. So what you really need is you need a DM finishing school, don't you? You need somewhere where DMs who actually want to play OD&D or AD&D, I guess, can learn those systems and learn them well and have support.
Having
Yeah,
something that's not a bunch of talking heads or drunken
yeah,
sages babbling and everybody having
yeah,
their own cutesy,
yeah,
unique interpretation, but instead of that, having like a storehouse of knowledge that increases your um, basically like that gives you sort of a ramp to get good, to just cut out some of those mistakes
Yeah.
and make you coast a little bit faster,
Mm,
and
yeah.
get you up to speed. That is good. That's like kind of like
Yeah.
one of the purposes of like a hobby. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Michael's comment there. He started playing first edition in the late '90s. Never heard of second edition for years. Used the new modules with the role books. Yep. I mean, quite
It
quite
mostly
right as well.
works
As in, yeah.
as long
But
as you
it's
don't. The treasure is going to be a
yeah.
different story, but sure.
There's an interesting thing for me that I in terms of my RPG history. I've talked about this with you, I think, before, or probably on this, but certainly elsewhere as well. But that I got into Star Wars D6 and then a bit later Deadlands and World of Darkness, late
Right.
'90s, early noughties. And then, but around the same time, early noughties, a guy at our War Games Club, Steve Tanner, was moving to America and was like, I just want to sell some of this stuff. And it's stuff that I think he didn't see as having high value. He was happy to just get rid of. And I think he sold me like a box of stuff, like a reasonable size box of stuff for like £15, now 30 quid or something. Not very much. And it had a bunch of models in it, loads of. I still have them mostly unpainted, which is a future project, I guess, for the boys, for my kids, of Napoleonics, Metal Napoleonics that I only painted some of, and I got most of the first real core first edition books, as I got the DMG, Monster Manual, Fiend Folio, and Monster Manual 2. I didn't get, but I didn't get a PHB, so I had this weird thing. And at this point, I think about 10 years later, I realized you could just get a PDF of this thing. But in 2001 or whatever, I didn't know that, and you probably couldn't. Um, and I certainly didn't know about Osric. Osric didn't exist in 2001, but you get the idea that this. There's an interest. So in that sense, some of my oldest RPG books that I have owned are actually AD&D first edition books, which I found the monster manuals very, very imaginatively informative. Like just reading through them, not knowing what the rules were, barely understanding them, and reading bits of the DMG and obviously not understanding it very much. But certainly, I found the. I didn't dislike it, but I just didn't get it. But the monster manuals were very, very good for me, I think.
There's a point I think we missed, which is
Yep.
about the state of the OSR now, but probably one of the what's the best description for it? Like I'd almost
Mm-hmm.
use the term like the mandate of heaven, or
The
the
mandate of heaven has passed.
right. Who gets to make the single popular retro clone, which will probably be
Mm,
a copy of BX? Well, maybe with the death of the OGL, we won't have that anymore. But who gets to be in charge of that, right?
yeah.
That's a real what's going to be the dominant language. OSC has been the dominant language for a while, right? Before that, it was Lab Lord, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Who gets to be in charge of that? That's also interesting because that's actually you kind of control the heart of the OSR, the sort of like
Mm,
this thin kind of almost like this rind or this point where you have all these clustered groups that have little to do with each other or don't understand each other, but in the distance, dimly, they see the
mm,
retro clone and they think there
yeah.
lies OSR, and they think like, okay, that's
Yeah.
us. That's
Tanalorn. Yeah.
the what is it, Mythgarth, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
the
Indeed. Yeah. Yeah.
heart of the world. Yeah. So who
Yeah.
gets to be in charge of that?
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair and good point. Partly because in with atomization, you tend to have fewer mediating institutions, and in that sense, Lab Lord and G Plus were in different ways mediating institutions. One was the sacred text, and one was the temple. And that's the latter isn't the case. There are not shared spaces. So that's I think the former is an interesting case. Especially, I think my prediction, because I think you're asking predictively, my Cassandra here is that there isn't going to be a set of shared texts between the different successors to the old OSR. I think you are looking at the idea that there's just going to be different communities, maybe with different names, maybe seeing themselves as connected to the old OSR, um, or not, like CAG, like NSR, like whatever. Um, and they're going to have different texts. I think for CAG, I wonder how far it's just basically OD&D, AD&D, and Osric and Swords and Wizardry. Like,
Well,
yeah, I think, yeah.
so I think um OSC, I'm not sure how long, because like OSC was the you know the
Mhm.
heart of the OSR, right? Whoever gets
Yeah,
whoever is in charge of making the better laid out literal copy of
yeah.
BX
Yeah.
is the king. And Dolmenwood didn't quite do so well, I think. Uh, so I predict some sort of. I wonder if we'll have Shadow Dark as the lingua franca of
Mhm.
the of the post OSR, because that would really sort of be a definite way to signal that times in fact have changed. Well, we have
Yeah.
a non old school game in the old school Renaissance. Then it's like,
Yeah.
okay, we've moved
It's
on.
it's a- it's
You know,
it's a 5e hack of basic. Yeah.
right?
Gene
Yeah.
does remember buying first editions that came out because he started with Holmes. Holmes does get friendly mentions in the spaces that Prince and I circulate in. Much more, it should be said, than Moldvay Cook. But
I
uh,
well,
Becker.
I think also part of the
Mm,
antipathy towards a basic D&D is far more in the same way that the antipathy towards 2E is by 1E players. It's not driven so much or only by like the any perceived mechanical
mhm.
deficiencies, but it's more the sort of social context around it, right? Like, so the
Yeah.
reason, again, we have the meme of the BX, the BX players is just that this is the, you again, you start with a group relatively highly invested, uh highly knowledgeable OD&D, AD&D, and then whatever, the BX comes along, and you have all these scrubs playing BX, and you're like, oh my god, what is this?
Yeah.
All right, so that's kind of the, I think that's more a reason for the antagonism.
Yeah.
um Not that there aren't any problems with it, of course. I
Absolutely. Yeah.
fully endorse that.
Becker, well, he predicts he's talking about Lingua Franca here. That the new first edition will be the
Osric,
new BX, which will make Osric, I suppose. And there is a new
s-
edition of Osric coming out, I think, isn't there? So,
with considerable VTT support, that would be
yeah,
under, I think, yeah, under
yes,
Mythmere Games. That would be pretty interesting.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
because
think if Foundry
somebody
becomes a
needs to
mass
do that.
platform, yeah,
Yes.
if Foundry becomes a mass platform for that, EOTB, a
It,
great contributor to that, as well as Celestian, who sometimes is in the chat here.
Gus says OSR
Gus,
will go Shadow Dark. Also, controversial
yeah,
opinion. I think
yeah,
if it does, that would be okay. Gene hates Shadow Dark.
yeah, yeah.
You're gonna be mad, Gene. So
Yeah, I
with
mean, he correctly points out that rolling to light a torch is dumb. Like
listen,
this is about usage die stuff, basically, isn't it? But yeah,
oh, the
does
no,
something happen
does
or
it have
not?
usage dice? Oh no. Okay, anyway,
I'm trying to remember
even
how
if it
something like
does,
that.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
With Shadow Dark people, this is again,
yeah,
if you play Morkborg, I hate you. Please go away.
yeah,
Right. With Knave, all this stuff, I get like this. This is an Emperor's New Clothes design that somebody does
yeah,
something, and it must have taken an hour of work or two. Anybody could do that, right? Um, and it's just all it's too casual. With people that with Shadow Dark, it's the new hotness, so it's going to attract people that are, again, that are attracted by trends, that are sort of like flighty. But at the same time, whenever I talk to people that are into Shadow Dark, they kind of seem more genuine in their
yeah, yeah.
enthusiasm, and they're not
That is my impression.
aliens.
That is my
It's not.
impression. Yeah.
This is not an alien species that you're communicating with. They're not
Whoa,
completely
whoa.
wrapped up in stories,
Yeah,
or whatever, and all this bizarre. They're not talking about
yeah.
diegetic advancement. Well, sometimes,
Digest.
but so
Well,
Shadow Dark.
I would say
It
diegetic.
yeah.
By the way, diegetic advancement is actually good, but not in the way that anyone uses that term now. AD&D is
It's a
diegetic.
meme
Anyway,
now.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, indeed, Patchy. No, I agree. I'd say friend of this channel, friend of Age of Dusk, John Roberts, has played Shadow Dark and thinks it's okay. He's played it, I think, a couple of times. I think it's worth saying, just as a fairness to a game that I'm just not going to play. People I respect
I'm also
don't think it's garbage.
uninterested in it, but I don't
Yeah,
I don't hate it. I don't hate the community either.
yeah,
They're not
yeah,
rabid. There's not this weird undercurrent of like political
hmm
tension to it. They seem to
yeah,
be mostly normal people trying to get
yeah,
into a form of gaming. So no,
yeah,
I would be very happy if I guess either Shadow Dark or OSE would probably still be fine if Gavin Norman manages to snatch victory
Yeah,
from the claws of defeat. But Shadow Dark would maybe be
yeah.
better. So
I
we'll
was going to
see.
say, yeah, that's just this is a inside baseball thing, but it is a thing where one suspects that the shift to the downward system was a good way of long term reducing the tail on OSE, damaging the kind of upside of OSE. Gus says he thinks adventure games will keep playing OD&D and AD&D. Yep, sure. I agree. E gives the cynic's view, and that the OSR, the broader OSR, will continue to have different shinies because, in his view, it's about buying new games, being seen playing them. Gene says he has been buying the new printings of Swords and Wizardry. So essentially, yeah, that's the thing, which
Swords
is
and
no
Wizardry has
D&D
been
retro. Yeah.
that's always like that's like a reprint or a retro clone that's kind of like the CAG compatible retro clone. And if CAG does well, it'll have to have
Mm-hmm.
one, something like that. I don't think it's inherently wrong to have somebody uh who
Mm-hmm.
makes a readable, noob
Yeah, yeah,
friendly, sort of spiffy
sure.
looking, and make sure that like these rule books are always in circulation. That's totally fine.
E says Shadow Dark doesn't bother him at all, unlike that damn Zeb game.
That's right.
Yeah. Becca points out there's some other comments on a different topic, but we'll just go through these ones. Casual game is never going to go away because people like casual gaming. Shadow Dark's Into the Odds, whatever will live on. This does go back to what we said, about an hour ago, doesn't it? That some people actually do want that kind of space to chill out and do something casual, play
Well,
with their brother-in-law on holiday, their brother-in-law who hates games.
I
Sure,
think Becker, the
I think so.
problem is that it's not that the eternal Shadow Dark won't go away, but like any particular incarnation will sort
The
of
ideal
like
Shadow Dark.
will be short-lived, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the problem with a lot of this stuff, that it's like this is flighty, right? This is
Mm-hmm.
ephemeral, right? And it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like it's kind of like short-lived. Everybody's attracted by the hype, and then after a while it just kind of like quietly sinks back into the mud. That's a shame.
Gene, separate sub-thread. Craig says it'd be great if there were AD&D mentorships, such as introduce players and especially DMs to the rule sets. Learning sessions with aspirants at the table.
So
I'd say Anthony Husso did actually. He taught me AD&D spells and combat according to his own interpretations, but he's very clear they are his. By the way, Anthony can do with the community's help right now, so do go to his Gumroad and buy some PDFs. They're on offer. Or some of them have been bundled, rather than I should say. So do help him out at a time where he needs help. Craig adds combat session, exploration session, domain and stronghold, and
I think
then
did make a point. This was a long
yeah,
time
please,
ago. This
yes,
was in a blog post
mm-hmm.
or in a Michael Stackpole novel. But no, I
Yeah,
did make a point.
you wrote it in the margins
I wrote it in the margins.
of the
Yeah,
Black Fleet crisis.
of the Black Fleet crisis. That's Timothy Zahn, I think. But is it? Yeah, it might be.
No, that's
Anyway,
Stackpole. No, no. Yeah.
you're
Anyway,
right.
go
Oh,
for it.
okay. Anyway,
Yeah,
so
we'll do our Star Wars stream a different day.
oh my God, yeah. Um,
Yeah,
Getting all
yeah.
part of my brain is trying to recall that because I think I read that. But no, what I was going to say is that was my observation, that actually
Mhm.
a failure in the OSR, I guess, and I think I put this at the Grognard's feet, and it's maybe not entirely fair, but is that there's sort of like this uh, that there is this sort of perceptible division between young and old,
Mhm.
and they did manage to get it enshrined. This concept of like, oh look, it's the Grognard, right?
Yeah.
This idea that if you're an older person playing D&D, that you have absolutely fucking nothing to say, and nothing worth learning from, and that there's just kind of like this division as well. So having some, I think we had that in Pedantia for a while. It was actually pretty cool having a place where you have people of a wide age range running around. Um, you know, what is it? 18 to like whatever, even people in their 50s. It's actually
You're like
good.
60, 70,
Yeah,
are
and
you?
I'm going to joke now that in the OSR Discord, they of course were also looking for a wide age range, from 18 to 12, right?
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah, yeah.
25 to
Only downwards.
12.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um,
But no, but the point that's being made is that
mhm.
of course the um it is good. very often, if when you're running a game, it can be very helpful to have people that are more experienced than you, and to discuss with them like how they handle certain problems. That's really good.
Yeah. I'll pop back to Gene in a second there. He clarifies his age is written with letters. It's a
Roman
Latin.
letters, yeah,
It's a Latin
yeah.
gang only kind of situation. Gene says, re Craig's point. Love to see a book type product that runs almost like a very detailed example of play, that covers all aspects of an adventure, show how to play in DM. Craig says, yeah, I agree. One of the barriers to AD&D is the learning curve. And Kurt adds on that note, we need a CAG digital
We need
publication,
a
like a
a
zine, a
zine.
zine,
Yeah, we
a magazine. Yeah,
we
great.
gotta call it something else
Yeah,
to
yeah.
keep it away from all the Zine slop that's being
Yeah.
pushed.
I was going to say, there's, I mean, echoes from Fomal Horton, and
It's fantastic.
I'm
Yeah,
afraid
fight
I
on.
actually, what's it? What fight on? What is Zion? What was Ben Lawrence's one? I actually have not been able to, because I just
Through
haven't been able to kind of budget it
Altuan's
in. But
door.
yeah, but he's obviously switched to a Patreon, which I'd love to. I'm like, I need to sort that out at some point. But got to work out that in the monthly budget, basically. Um,
Ben Layman, that's the yeah.
yeah,
I respect Ben Layman for sure. I think he does good stuff.
yeah.
The CAG rag.
Guzilf,
So
the CAG rag.
I was
Yeah,
thinking. So yeah, we should like monks. We should eschew any sort of
yeah,
ostentation
yeah,
or layout, as like it would
yeah.
be
No,
like vulgar. So it would just be
yeah,
double printed A4, just
yeah.
stapled together, no cover.
Like a Bard Games publication from the early '80s. Yeah,
Milan's is
it-
really the Kang sign. I kind of
yeah.
agree.
I think.
It goes for Fomalhaut and Fight On.
Hmm. I feel like historically, it is hard to deny, as much as this is not E's taste, that obviously Footprints was a locale for that, wasn't it? Like Dragon's Foot Footprints, and there's some very good adventures in that, and it definitely tended that way. I don't know how far it really, was pushing everything we care about, but I think it was in that in that realm for a while. Um, Craig, ironically, Grognards are not necessarily masters of the rules rather than being masters of how they run a table. Yeah, people who've run a game for a long time often aren't running the game you're running. They're good at playing with their friends. It's a good thing, but it's not necessarily the same thing as that person can teach you how to run the game itself. Becca says, I agree, Prince. We're moving to a space where people are interested in more serious gaming. Once folks reach that realization, one will be the last man standing. So his point was, the OSR, there'll always be casual gaming, but it'll be increasing something beyond the remit of organized old school discussion. It'll be something that happens outside. And so I think he
It'll
thinks
just
that
latch
organized,
on to whatever
yeah,
other current. Yeah, there's
yeah,
no.
what,
That's the
yeah,
point, that there's
yeah,
no further permanence. The lifeline
yeah,
ends there. You just kind of like
yeah,
restart the same cycle, and then you go through the
yeah.
same boring old steps. That sucks, right?
But I think Becca's actually being fairly sanguine and saying, look, the actual old school
Yeah,
space will only consist of people talking about the older games. So great, good. Let other
but
people move on if they like.
well, I think that's the sort of opportunity, right?
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah,
interesting part of the OSR was actually to show that everybody, all the rhetoric about, well, we have modern game design now. Like, these people are all idiots. They're fucking
yeah.
stupid. The point
Turns
is
out,
that yeah, you can, yes, Virginia, you can go back in time. You can turn back the wheel, because certain properties of, even in something as small as gaming, are not ephemeral. They're actually enduring. And
mm,
suddenly you can, if you go back, you can benefit from all of that sophistication, right? And you can
mm,
advance further and further and further. And
mm,
this exists in a few other rare places, like something like, say, the Doom modding community or something. And
yeah,
like the stuff you can come up with, if you reach that level of sophistication, that's awesome, right? Who the hell
yeah, yeah.
wants to do the same damn thing over and over and over again? Let's
Yeah,
advance.
you see it. It's something I noticed in terms of the idea of retrieval. This is the academic term, you understand, so you must forgive me. But
Yes,
retrieval is, you see it with Old Hammer. Particularly second edition Warhammer, somewhat Rogue Trader, but particularly second edition Warhammer 40k, and fourth
right.
and fifth edition Warhammer Fantasy, and it's somewhat third edition. and the idea that something is lost after that and is very much lost now is heavily lost now. Not in every GW game. So Blood Bowl is actually a good counterexample. But lots of these games are quite soulless. Like they are hyper streamlined, not in terms of being easy, but in terms of they are mechanized in a way that's more amenable to competitive players is the biggest thing. And to some
Oh,
degree,
yeah.
they're also they're simultaneously aiming to be mechanized to competitives, but also open to casuals. This is like I think a doom march, to be clear. But you read these old games, and though there's some shonky stuff, there's just some really exciting stuff and fun stuff. For like, look at this fun mechanic. That's kind of fun. By the hey, come up with the rule and then discuss when everyone's calm afterwards because you get angry during the game. Discuss whether the rule's good. Feel free to go and buy die-cast models from a historical range and
Yeah,
convert it. This excitement,
more
this
human.
verve,
Yeah,
yeah,
for
yeah, yeah,
sure.
yeah. And you do see some people trying to say, look, that's great. There's a game called Warhammer Renaissance, which is basically a fourth and fifth edition Warhammer Fantasy adaptation, very much in the old school Renaissance kind of style, in that sense of like, I want that game, but with just a couple of weird interactions improved, like stuff that was improved later. And so you can go back and you can say, look, not everything always gets better. Things do get better, but not everything is constantly getting better in every area. And so let's go
Yeah,
back, let's get this old stuff and let's bring the good new stuff back. So,
correct. Yes.
you will agree, stuff like kits vastly improves AD&D, and, and things like that.
Kits
You know,
and
yep,
the
yeah, yeah.
adventure where you have to fight Vecna, and at the end,
Yes,
the Eye in the Hand.
Vecna lives. Vecna
The
lives.
Vecna
Yeah,
lives,
best
and Zeb
best
Cook,
adventure.
he just full on pulls the plug. He says, "Listen, disregard all the rules. You have to
Yeah,
story game Vecna through the gates,
there
right?
are
You
no
have to like."
rules. There are no rules. Yeah,
This is
but yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
but the serious point is retrieval does consist of not
Yes,
going back to the
I
past and
agree.
thinking they were idiots in the past, or they were kind of okay, but they have no idea really what they're talking about, as if it's germ theory, like these people 1,000 years ago didn't know germ theory. We're talking about the fact that there might be some contributors, contr- contributions from the past, very large ones, and to do with games. I certainly see with Warhammer, and I see with D&D that a retrieval process gives more fun rules, basically things that people are going to enjoy more.
I think so
I
too. Like
think.
some of these, what people consider to be improvements that have come out of the OSR, and that's
Mm,
why I say that. Like I talk about the whatever the snow crash
yeah,
Google Plus moment where you
the
see
Babel virus.
the Babel virus. Yeah,
Yeah,
the what is it? I'm trying to come up with the worst ones. The
usage died.
usage
Stuff like that.
die is
Just like
straight from Apocalypse World, and this is
yeah, yeah,
just a um there are very rare occasions, like say with a wand, where
mm,
if you don't know beforehand how many charges it has anyway, and you can't discover, there's no way of discovering it, then okay, sure. Or maybe it's not a wand, it's an alien laser pistol. You can't
yeah.
identify.
That's a
Like
better
there's some
example. Yeah,
ways to do it, right? But for the most part, for arrows or for rations, this is just a horrible idea. Like
yeah, yeah,
you add all this disgusting randomness where it was not before. It's just
yeah,
we're overloading the encounter die, where suddenly all
yeah,
these
yeah. That's
events
another
like
example
torches
too.
going out are causally connected to
To
random
more
encounters. It's
monsters.
just,
Yeah,
if I imagine if you're like if you were a programmer or something, and you would see like this pull request and somebody said, look, innovation, it's just such a ugly, and the only motivation seems to be uh that it's faster. But nobody ever seems to consider, like, well, what do we get from this? What is the
yeah.
cost, right?
You've
So a
talked
lot of
before.
that is junk.
You mentioned the phrase cargo cult, and I think you can often
Yeah.
identify complicated, weird mechanics which are in there are meant to produce some sort of thing. They're designed for effect. They're not strictly cargo cult in the Polynesian sense, but they're designed for effect. But they won't have that effect, and they skew so many other things in the game because they don't understand what makes the game work. And yeah,
Cargo
I think
cult
yeah,
in the OSR would be, you would have to look at excessive random tables,
yeah,
and
yeah.
but this is even maybe a sort of like a philosophical difference between the OSR and classic adventure gaming, where
Mm,
with the OSR it's almost like you have far more trust in this. It's almost like you're looking more at like the exploration and excitement of, like, wow, what's going to happen next, right? The It's less, per
Mm,
definition it's less challenge oriented. You increase the randomness, but then
yeah, yeah,
it's all about the dopamine hit of having something unexpected happen and the emergence of
yeah.
play that comes from that, right?
Yes, it's strictly degenerate. Yeah. Michael mentions, and this is a relevant point to do with the way that not everything always gets better. Is they try to control the ethos of the game after getting mail about a party killing Thor and the steps they take to curb that behavior. Yeah, referring to TSR, and you get similar stuff to do with what the concern about demons being in monster manuals and the fact you could find them and meet them. Like this sense that you could tell that TSR were desperately worried about the commercial upside of this, and
For sure.
so bowdlerized stuff. Yeah, no, I think that's a good early example from TSR, not from Gary, albeit, but from TSR of that happening. I think you see even Gary is, as I've suggested before on this show, almost unique in terms of these creators for not becoming incredibly annoying about like hating his own game. And I say this like you see with Deadlands, Shane Lacey Hensley is embarrassed by his own setting. You even Mark Miller, who I think designed the other great classic adventure game for sci-fi, Traveller, which is a great game. Been playing it with my friends, but he ends up being like, yeah, well, you're just gonna have like stories. It's just about telling, the modules are all stories that people need to like go through. Um, but Gary stays the course, but is of course removed from TSR as part of the upshot of that.
Maybe
Um,
that's part of the
yeah,
maybe that's sort of what kept him going. But I
yeah,
like to think, I don't know, you have a certain character types, I guess.
yeah,
But yeah, maybe as people get older, they become more cynical. They're just like, ah, whatever. It's just I feel that's like giving up, where you say it's
yeah,
just about the game, it's about the story you tell each other. The game don't
yeah,
matter. Like a
yeah.
give me a break here, pal. Like
Never
what's
let the dice get in the way of a good story. Um,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
awful.
there's it was interesting actually reading in terms of a game that's actually trying to do that almost. A while ago I got a couple of my World of Darkness rule books down just to be like, how do these books describe designing an adventure or whatever? And it is interesting that you can tell they're like, look, there needs to be both this story that they experience, but you also need to allow setbacks to happen. So you need to work out how to kind of, and in a way, that is just story
You need
pathing.
to
I'm actually,
allow them
yeah,
to
yeah,
happen. It's not
yeah,
the
yeah,
system doesn't
yeah.
naturally produce
Well, the
consequence. No,
well,
you as the DM need to
no, the system does.
actively,
The worst that's the
yeah,
problem. The system does produce the
right,
setbacks, but the game, which is about the story, doesn't want them. So you have a complete mismatch. Hence why story gaming becomes a thing, obviously.
right, yes.
So, but in a sense, you're almost like, actually, this is fine. You've understood that there has to be story pathing. There has to be like, if they fail, this happens. If they succeed, this happens, and you can tell the story. But you can also tell that it's an incredibly complicated idea for them because they're like, but the whole point is for them to have this cool story about vampires or whatever. And I think that's something you see in second edition AD&D products. You see it even in first edition stuff, of course. The idea that you have to do that. Deities and demigods giving god stats did just turn into big monster DMs who didn't know how to run things like teleport at will. Yay and nay. Partly, I think there is a theoretical thing where very high level characters can fight very powerful creatures, and that's fun. So, in a sense, I think you know that's actually intended. But I think it leads to a problem where yes, DMs aren't usually skillful enough to run those monsters well. Prince and I talked about this in a high level episode, I think, which then means that you end up with just very boring, weird fights that no one's really sure why they're happening. But hey, at least we killed Orcus or whatever. Um,
Oh man,
yeah,
yeah. I still need to. I do have like an extra level for Slit Hive planned, where I'll
yeah,
definitely be using some demigods. So, well, stay tuned. I guess I have to
yeah.
test
And I
everything.
think that that's part of the there isn't the knowledge loss, but I think it's also really hard. Like how many people were running high level AD&D really well in the 80s? We're going to do another episode on this at some point, but part of it is actually also rediscovery of knowledge. I'm talking about retrieval of the rules and retrieval of the knowledge. Like we do need someone needs to actually pay E. This is the point here's made that the whole thing is it'd be an enormous project, but someone should pay E or someone else to go through every dragon and polyhedron to and random leaflet from Origins or something to find every single clarification that basically particularly Gary made on anything he had written, um, and things like that, because there is a lot of lost knowledge. But also there's stuff we need to somewhat develop our own knowledge of because there's not loads. Like I say, lots of the people who have run games continue since the 70s and 80s. As great as it is they're doing that, people like the game D&D, that Instagram account, as far as I'm concerned, that guy, they're not actually playing AD&D, so it's essentially irrelevant to those of us wanting to learn it. So part of the retrieval is the rediscovery of how these old machines work. There is this thing of like us poking the machine and trying to work out how it works and trying to work out how to run Orcus or Demogorgon in a game.
Yeah, part of that is experimentation too, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah, like again, it shouldn't. There's. I think it's good to have this idea that there's something to be. That people in the past weren't total idiots.
yeah,
And people in the now aren't total super geniuses.
yeah.
To recognize sort of like the beneficial elements to it without it turning into just a sort of a gospel,
Yeah,
right? But yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. So yeah, are there what's left? What haven't we picked up on? Obviously, any final questions in the comments are welcome as well. But what haven't we picked up on? We've talked about how at some level the kind of development of what we call the OSR. We've talked about the split and divergence
Oh, I think
between yeah
maybe have we talked about the I guess I do want to get it out there. This is
yeah.
my contempt for rules light games and the
Oh yeah,
problem with them.
let's go
Yeah,
for it. Let's go
just
for it.
very quickly. But it's just
Yeah.
this idea that um I think it started nobly with some idea that like, oh, let's figure out what's a minimum viable form of Dungeons and
Hmm.
Dragons. If you when is it still D&D? It's an interesting
Yeah.
question, right? Because
Yeah.
you want to everybody wants to cut down on prep time and all that shit, but it um this growing into some movement where everybody just makes these these little hacks or ultralights that take, let's face it, if it takes 2 or 3 hours to make something, it's probably not going to be very good. The problem is just that again, it's all ephemeral. A real game takes time. It takes has to be refined. Also, has to be played for quite a while. You need to work out the kinks. That there's something very, I guess, sort of like decadent or fake
Yeah.
about that development.
It's
I
indeed
hope it'll be over soon.
yeah. I think that the particular phase of rules lights. I don't mean the existence of any rules lights, but go back 20 years. There's rules lights at some level, but the sort of fad will go. Yes, and I think that's because it's something which obviously has just been the particular flourish of fungus in recent years. The current spores. Um, we have a couple of things. Yeah, we can come back to that. But just E says, as someone with a longer perspective, the single thing I noticed that keeps people from learning AD is they seem to want the books to be enough, not grapple with historical norms. I.e., the way the text was applied for a long, long time by nearly everyone who read it. I think you find this in the study of ancient literature as well, and other areas. The idea that suddenly things that would have been understood and have been understood in one way for a very long time become open season, but that then actually for some people that becomes stressful because they're like, oh, okay, I just need to know exactly. Someone needs to tell me what it means. But that's part. I would say perfectly seriously, we do need that compendium, don't we, of rules and rulings from the late 70s and early 80s as a supplement. It's just very time consuming to
Well,
do that.
making something for CAG like a permanent document that you can just
Mhm.
reference if you find yourself answering the same questions over and over and over again would
Yeah,
be a
yeah,
good idea. A CAG primer.
yeah, yeah. I was going to say,
First
we've got
rule, rulings, not rules. Second,
yes,
the answer
rules,
is
not
not on your
rulings.
character sheet. Third,
Yeah,
no meanies. Okay?
yeah.
All are
So we need a
welcome here.
CAG primer. We need a book length CAG example of play, like as in a whole adventure, and we need a CAG rag. That's what's been agreed today at the meeting
The
of
CAG rag.
of the hosts. Jean
Let's
does
just call it
suggest
the, yeah, go ahead.
a great thread about running AD&Ds on Dragonsfit in the campaign journals. Look up Crazy Canucks
Versus
versus
G1
G1
to
to Q1.
Q1. Oh, that's good.
Yep. Yeah, yeah. Craig does comment that we're talking about historical anthropology. We are. Michael says I was lucky enough to learn from some older when I was young, so I was introduced to a lot of the historical norms. Most people my age came in during 3, and it's never learned. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. And again, this is AD&D is a complete trivial example of this, but this is a more widely observed pattern, right, of the loss of cultural knowledge. And in our very small corner of a hobby, it's notable that that's so often what the debates are about. Is just like, can this text have any meaning? Can anyone establish its meaning?
I have
And you
an
realise so many of
ancillary
them
observation to
go for it,
share, Owen.
please
My
do.
theory is that people
Yep.
who come to first edition from, originally third and that really
Mm.
like third are actually they're all geniuses. They're all actually very good at at 1E. This is not even, or at least they're good at adventures. This is not a facetious point. I do genuinely think that.
You've made this argument before. I think your point is you're like third edition selects, if you liked third edition, it may select, but you liked the game side of it, not the character creation. It may select for people who might be willing to deal with real systems, basically.
If you're
Uh,
not
yeah.
brutally, like monstrously autistic and caught up in the character building, so I guess that eliminates like maybe half of them. But
Mhm.
I do genuinely think that then if you are then introduced to 1E and the wider range of possibilities
Mhm.
that first edition offers and old school gaming offers, I think that's it's like you get a whole new toolbox to play with, and
Yeah.
you've already trained on like one very
Yeah.
important element, and then suddenly all that other stuff opens up, and you're like, okay, this is actually fantastic. I never knew I could do all this
Well, I
shit.
think it's not quite the same thing, but I think I've described this before. I think on this show, but also I've definitely told you, is
Yeah.
the sense of the interesting experience of both playing fourth edition, but then a bit later running a werewolf game
Yes.
and having to just make up loads of stuff. By that I mean like work out a world. People are like, what if I do this? Because I was trying to be really open, and there's nothing so disciplinary as being like, okay, I actually need to be able to adapt the rules of this game to the fact that players want to make decisions. And similarly, I think that there's a parallel there. It's not the same thing, but the idea that I would say historical wargaming is a good preparation for AD&D naturally because AD&D comes from
Yes.
historical wargaming. But it's also the fact that if you just try to honestly run any semi-functional RPG, and fourth edition and werewolf are both semi-functional RPGs,
Okay.
if you try to sincerely run them, then you will end up having to learn lots of quite important skills. And
If I
that's
had
that
to
one
pick
thing.
two
Yeah,
systems that would make you
yeah,
that I figured would be like the least
yeah,
conducive to like a
yeah,
functional 1E DM, it would have to be fourth edition and werewolf. I think in terms of like teaching
yeah.
you the fucking
And
wrong things.
but no, I think as I say, imagine what you're doing is running these games, and then
Yes.
when players say, "I would like to do something," you say, "Oh, okay, I'll try to let you do that, and I'll find a rule." That's the point I'm making. Is it or players like,
That
"I want to go
skill.
somewhere." Yeah, it
Yeah, okay,
pushes your
of
skills
making
at
rulings.
yeah, and also of
Alright.
creating worlds of like working out what happens when players interact with the world. Like the most valuable skill I have developed is not to do with rules. It is to be very clear. Rules are incredibly important. I'm a rules guy, but the most important thing I've learned is not to do with the rules, but to do with being able to manage the fact that players want to do stuff and not find that
Yeah.
stressful,
Or to make
and be
something that's
very relaxed
in a
about it.
way right,
Yeah,
yeah, where the rules are very important, but that you have something that is in a way both
yeah,
it is entwined with the rules, but it's also like more, I guess, in a
yeah.
way. It does allow
It's
for
why
more
you have the
interaction.
rules.
Yeah,
It's why you have the rules. You wanted to have a game where people could, adventure in a fantasy world, and you wanted to adjudicate it as a war game.
for sure.
So you come up with rules, right? You don't come up with the rules. It's not like the point is you don't come up with the kind of the algorithms and then find a theme. That Euro game designers do that, but that's not what war gamers
That's
traditionally do.
awful. Yeah,
And as
I
Gene
hate that.
says, if people played some wargaming before AD&D, they'd understand the combat order. Yeah, I think that's the thing is you run these games. It's why when I reviewed Warhammer Quest 1995, that game, great game. I was like, this is like the best CAG game of the 90s. It's the only CAG game of the 90s. Like you can, even if there's some goofy stuff in it, there's so many things which are much more like traditional D&D than D&D under Wizards.
Oh
You
yeah.
can see that they are really because it's a descendant of Hero Quest, and Hero Quest is a descendant of D&D, and you can tell that the creators are like, what would happen if rather than telling a big story, you just go into a dungeon and try to get gold? You can see this thing, the cogs whirring. It was the first retro clone. um,
For
it
sure.
wasn't, but that's a joke. But yeah, it's something that you play these older war games and you see and you see the discussions they're having in war games, including after AD&D is created. Yeah, it's very informative both in tabletop and in miniature contexts. And it's actually a lot more informative bluntly than most RPG discussion and most RPG theory, I think. Yeah, in my experience. And I guess war games are not necessarily as much your thing, but I'd certainly commend them to you to the degree you haven't played as much.
No, certainly not.
Yeah.
No,
Yes, Michael.
I'll have to check them out.
Yeah. Become a master of rules before you break them. Yeah, exactly. People don't put the work in. And Gene, yeah, 3 changed the way people approach exploring gaming. They've got to have to describe what they want to do. So yeah, I do think this is the counter argument, I should say, Prince, to
Yes,
3E
I agree.
was a good primer. Because
Well,
it says you solve the game by finding a modifier and rolling a die.
yeah, that does seriously damage them. That's true. I think probably maybe I should extend that to like maybe 3 EDMs are not quite
Mhm,
so hampered, but it did give players
mhm.
it severely cramped their style. That's totally true.
I assume this is, of course, something that you already see developing in RPGs with very detailed skill systems, like 3E having a unified universal skill system, which 2E doesn't. NWPs are not even the same. They are a step on that journey, but
Didn't
universal unified
RuneQuest
skills.
and that
RuneQuest, yeah,
whole line of games like RuneQuest kind of introduced this elaborate skill system. Am I wrong?
yeah, and I feel like
Warhammer Fantasy as well.
fantasy, yes, somewhat as an RPG. Yeah, but then again, Warhammer Fantasy is sort of a descendant of the D100 games that already existed,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, that's what
So
I'm
it's so
aiming
Call
at.
of Cthulhu, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah, Call of Cthulhu, Rollmaster,
right. That's right.
RuneQuest, those games going for much more like here are all the things you could do, rather than a lot of that doesn't. I mean, this is not something we need to argue here. You and I agree, and I'm sure most people do. But most of the time, no one needs. If it's like, do I know how to cut down a tree? The answer is yes. But also, I'm a woodsman. That's my background. Do I know how to identify trees? The answer is going to be usually yes.
Yeah,
If not, if you're not certain, it's a
roll.
50-50 chance. Yeah. And
Yeah,
you don't need to have mechanics for that, like modifiers. You just need to be like, look, on a 1 you know, on a 2 you don't. That kind of thing.
right.
And I think you realize that D&D selects mechanics. AD&D selects mechanics for that, whereas the early rebels against AD&D, not Traveller, but because Traveller has skills, but it's a different vibe. They're basically usually very small flat modifiers to a limited array of things. Like you get +2 to your to hit, that kind of thing. They're just like Thaco. And yet, whereas the early rebels are usually from people who think that is much more interesting. And I think you could say 3rd edition is the triumph of RuneQuest in that sense.
For sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I think that's an odd note, but a decent
Yeah.
note
Well, to end on,
to
yeah.
leave it on. I do have to get
Yeah.
going,
I was going to say we
but
do have one last comment, which is Traveller. He found it much later, but thinks it's perfect. Prince, you and I should play Traveller sometime. That's something we should add to our bucket list of things to do.
for sure.
Yeah,
I've only
yeah.
played Stars Without Number for quite a while, and I know
Which
it's definitely
is like
it's
a
like the
BX
BX
inspiration of it. Yeah,
version
yeah,
of Traveler with it
yeah,
has it's a pretty elaborate as a skill
yeah.
system and all that stuff like that is included. But yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. No,
Cool.
I
Okay.
enjoyed our talk.
Yeah. No, thanks. I'll end the stream. We'll be back next month. We might have a review, I suppose. We need to discuss that. We review, more high level chats, design an adventure on the spot. We've
Maybe
got a few ideas,
finally
haven't
a
we?
game, a
Yeah,
live
let's run a game.
game.
Let's run.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, let's talk about it. We'll work it out between now and then. Any
sure.
suggestions in the comments? Any further thoughts in the comments for those watching later? And we will catch you next time.
See you next time.